I've got that lightning inside me, son of a god. I'm like a titan that's rising, oh, just you watch. I'm stepping in the fade, there is no time to waste. I've got that lightning inside me, this is how legends are made. Are made. I'm cranking up on the throttle, victory is mine. Show you the harder the battle, harder I fight. I've come too far to quit. Stop back, I'm going in. I'm cranking up on the throttle. This is how legends are made.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our third installment of the Ships of the Lion stream. This time we're going to be covering the French battleships from the last pre-dreadnought all the way up to the last battleship. So we've got the Notebook of Wisdom is returning with a bunch of notes, and as well returning is the Sailing Robin.
Good morning everybody, good afternoon, or good midday, depending on where you are on the surface of Earth. Thank you all for being here and welcome to this stream. I'm honored to be here again supporting Lane with as good of a gameplay as I can possibly provide. Granted, I'm a bit biased here because of course they are French ships and, well, guess what? I am French as well. So what do you have in store for us today? Because the last stream about Royal Navy cruisers, we had very good feedback on it, and we hope that these streams are enjoyable, and we're always looking to improve them. So yeah, what do we have in store for today, Lane?
So we've got everything from the last of the pre-dreadnoughts that France built, which is the Danton class, all the way up to Jean Bart, Jean Bart, and anything in between. We're also going to cover a little bit of the attack on Mers el Kabir, as well as the Operation Torch engagement between Massachusetts and John Bart at Casablanca. So there's going to be some plenty of like little nitty-gritty details to cover in those two engagements, because we have a little bit less amount of ships to cover to get through. We don't have to go through 15 classes of Royal Navy cruisers in a couple hours, so we're lucky in that. And so that's where we're started. I saw a couple questions in the chat right away. Yes, we are aware that there is currently a bug with turrets.
Yes.
We don't know any details on what the bug is or anything like that. We're taking a look through it with a magnifying glass to see what exactly is going wrong, and then we're going to fix that as soon as we can.
We're working on it essentially.
Yeah,
we don't time working on it.
Yeah, we don't know when it'll be fixed because we want to nail it right. So
before we start, I'm going to do a live change here because I reckon blip is a little bit small. What I will do is try to that's gonna overlay on the other one. I want to try to make him slightly bigger on the screen here. Here we go. That should be fine. And I'm gonna switch to his camera to see if that's okay. That's fine enough. So that's fine enough. So at least my head is not taking like a third of the screen while blip is like just a tiny figure on the screen here. As usual, just a technical aspect, please tell us if the audio is fine, if our microphone sounds correct, if you can hear us correctly, if there's no echo, any kind of this shenanigans. And then we can get started. We can get started, definitely.
And Poland Ball is wearing a hat, Jai, so not a wig. So the beginnings of French battleship design go way back to the first ironclad, the Gloire. Well, kind of the first ironclad, the first seagoing ironclad, nominally speaking. And there's a whole mess, and that's the only way to describe it, of pre-dreadnoughts and ironclad battleships that France builds. And to go into any sort of detail on them, we would need an entirely separate stream because every single ship is different.
I do have a slight anecdote. He's like, most of you may know Dratchenifel from YouTube. Like, he makes historical videos on ships. And I remember tuning in one of his videos about French ironclad, and he was like, never again ask me to do a video about them because they have so many and they're so complex.
Yeah.
So,
They are like a world unto themselves, and so we're just going to skip to the end of that era, right to the Danton class, which is interesting enough, built after Dreadnought is announced. So Britain announces Dreadnought, and like after that, France starts the Danton class, starts building it. So people are still kind of catching up with the whole Dreadnought idea, and France unfortunately goes with a pre-Dreadnought. You can argue it's a semi-Dreadnought. It really isn't.
But there was no inspiration of Dreadnought being in the French ideas.
Not at this time.
Because it was kind of a similar...
The only thing that gets carried over is turbines. So one of the 3 revolutions of the Dreadnought design was that it's an all big gun capital ship. You have fire control and you have turbine engines. And so the French do take the turbine idea and rework their Danton class to use turbines. And they aren't entirely pleased with them. But it does put them into the semi-dreadnought category, even though they really aren't. And so these serve as the basis for basically all of their World War I ships. And so I'm going to pull up a picture of them here. So this is what Danton looks like. Note the 5 funnels in a pretty aggressive arrangement. You have two turrets for the main guns, which are 12-inch, 305 millimeter turrets, twins on the fore end and the aft. And then you also have secondary turrets, which are 240 millimeter guns.
Okay, so what was the first caliber? You mentioned 12-inch, correct?
Yeah, so it's 305 millimeter guns
okay.
and 240 millimeter guns.
Okay.
So this is just kind of the pre-dreadnought concept of a heavy secondary battery, and so this is also what one of the conversions of this ship is the basis of the Tier 3 battleship on PC, Turin.
Okay,
so,
I see.
And that's the basis of it. It doesn't actually happen in real life.
I see. How about the tonnage of these ships, if you have an idea?
So these are around...
So we can, sorry to interrupt, so that we can have like a scaling up of the tonnage for every ship, because it would be interesting to know.
These are around 17,500 tons, if I remember right. So they're fairly small by World War II. They're small by World War II standards, but they're kind of in line for World War I standards. The thing is with these is that since they kind of come out at the end of the pre-Dreadnought era, and after Dreadnought herself, there are so many changes to the design. There's literally over 500 changes to the design during construction.
During construction?
And it takes forever.
Of the terrain?
Sorry,
of the Danton class.
Danton class,
yes,
yeah.
Okay.
And
wow.
so they make tons of changes to the ships, and it takes a very long time. So they start building these in 1905. They don't enter service until like 1911.
Okay.
And it's 6 years to get a series of battleships out. And so France is working off of its frankly not very good pre-dreadnoughts until 1911. And so it's like, and these aren't even dreadnoughts. And so by the time that they enter service, the Royal Navy has 10 dreadnought battleships, 5 dreadnought battlecruisers, either in construction or in service. Germany had 8 battleships and 1 battlecruiser, and the United States had 6 battleships.
Before we go further, can you remind the less knowledgeable of us what defines a dreadnought compared to the other type of battleships that were before this kind of definition of A dreadnought battleship.
So a dreadnought battleship will have an all big gun main armament. So all the main armament is the same caliber, same size, and is a unified fire control. Typically they also have turbine engines, though they do not necessarily have them. And those are the main defining features.
Okay, because in the past, battleships were mostly boasting a variation of different calibers and different kind of turrets, but there was not like a streamlined one armament, one type of shell.
Yeah, so like in our game, a lot of the battleships you see, you have a main armament and you have a secondary armament. For some of the French pre-dreadnoughts, you would have a main armament, a secondary armament, a tertiary armament, a quaternary armament, a quintenary armament, and a sextenary armament. And so you would have everything from 305 millimeter to 240 millimeter down to
so
like
a lot of different kind of
194.
ammunitions to handle.
Yeah. And also a lot of these you can't differentiate when you're trying to get range to your target. You can't tell the difference between a 240 millimeter shell and
the water splashes or the impacts. Yeah, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So and that's why they were kind of problematic and why the switch happened.
All right. So sorry if it was off topic, but
No,
I felt
no.
like it was an interesting detail of what a dreadnought truly is.
And so these stay in service for quite a long time. And then this is the Voltaire, which is a different one of the class. And they stay in service until the middle of the 20s, and I think some stay around into the 30s. So like they stay for much longer than they should have. But it's just how they had, it's what they had.
So these ships were essentially kind of outgunned and outmatched upon release.
Yeah.
To some extent. Okay.
Yeah. So moving on, they basically take this design and dreadnought it, and so and that gets us to the Corvette.
Okay.
So Corvette starts production in around 1910, and so this is a first generation dreadnought, right when people are starting work on their first generation super dreadnoughts. So super dreadnought is defined by a step up in armament power. And so this is when the British are starting to make the Orion class. The Americans are starting with the New York and Texas. Japan's working towards the Congo class. So these are they're well behind the time by the time these start making their way into production.
So the hull itself, is it the same hull as the Denton class that got refitted to fit streamlined armament, or is it a completely different hull?
It's based on the Danton hull, and the Danton armor layout is very similar, but they are separate hulls. So they're completely new ships, but very much based off of the design of the Danton.
So from the Denton to the Courbet class, I can say Courbet class.
Yeah.
What are we know that the streamlined guns, one armament is the big step up. What else is a big step up compared to the previous class?
So the main thing is honestly the guns. The armor is about the same. It's around 9 inches of armor on a fairly wide belt, which is not very thick armor for the time, but it is extensive. It covers a lot of the ship. And it also has a unified secondary armament and a unified primary armament. So the primary guns are the 305 millimeter gun, and the secondaries are the 138.6 millimeter gun, seen on a bunch of the destroyer, well, not the same gun, but the same caliber seen on a lot of French destroyers. The interesting thing was that at the time, France had a theory that the battles were not going to be very long range. They were going to be at 10,000 yards or so. And so these, in their initial first configuration, the Courbet's secondary armament actually outranges the main armament by a couple thousand yards.
Okay, the 139 millimeters had more effective range than the main 305. Okay.
Yeah, so the 305 millimeters as designed had a maximum range of 14,000 yards, where the 139 millimeters could reach out to 16,000 and a half. And so you had much it was still kind of that pre-dreadnought philosophy of secondary armament and rate of fire.
I see some comments in the chat that like a 305 millimeter could kill a Yamato and stuff. What I'm guessing is that you have the gun caliber, all right, which
Yep.
is one thing, but then you also have the propellant, you also have the type of shells, and all these are going to drastically improve the performance of a rifle, even if the caliber stays the same. So I
Yep.
guess Courbet era 305s was not as powerful as, for example, a 305 from Alaska,
Yeah, no.
which was 50
It
years
was-
after that. So
It was like comparing Courbet's guns to Alaska's guns, it's no contest. Alaska could blow Courbet out of the water, like no problem. The armor is very similar between the two ships, and Alaska is far faster and also has radar fire control and all these things. So even though they are the same caliber gun, these are a World War I gun, pre-World War I gun. And one of the things that's interesting that starts and stays as a trend through all of the French battleships that we'll be talking about today is that the Courbet class introduces a omni-purpose shell for the French battleships, which is essentially, think of it as a armor-piercing shell that has both a short fuse and a long fuse.
oh, you've told me about it on during work time, some sort of variable fuse that detects the amount of ammo it's going through and decides when's the best time to actually fuse.
Right.
Okay.
And so it doesn't work very well with the Courbets. They don't really get it working reliably until the Dunkirk class, but it is a feature. And basically what happens is the shell has two fuses in it to determine detonation. And so the light fuse and the heavy fuse are timed such that whenever they detect, or they basically are weighted for how fast they decelerate upon impact with armor. So if they hit a heavy plate, they will use a long fuse, but if they hit a light plate, they'll use a short fuse. And it allows them to try to have a more optimal shell for any engagement that they need to. This is not modeled in game. They have standard fuses in game, but it is an interesting feature historically.
And that was as early as the 1920s.
1910s.
The 1910s, sorry, I meant that as I was talking like a century, but no, you actually said 1910s.
Yep.
I see. Okay, was there any other nations in the world that had that technology regarding this kind of variable fuse in their main caliber guns? Or was this like some kind of breakthrough regarding ship warfare?
So other nations tried it. The French are, from what I can remember, the only people that really went with it and actually developed it further. Because at the time it wasn't very reliable, although it's a pretty good idea. You also have to make compromises in your the resistive power of your shell from breaking up, because you have to dedicate more for explosive filler, which makes your shell weaker. And so that's another aspect of penetration where shells will shatter on impact if they hit an armor plate too hard and don't have the structural integrity to hold up. So
That's variable fuse for you.
yeah. And so during World War I, it didn't really work very well. Later on, they got it working. And so it would work pretty well in World War II, even though they didn't get very much opportunities to use it. And so these ships went on to serve into World War II, but Robin.
Sorry, I'm bullying tier 3. Don't let me interrupt you. Don't let the gameplay interrupt you at all.
But these see service into World War II, but they do not get very much modernization. They get a few refits that you can see in game. Basically, what they do is originally they had an armor belt that went around the entirety of the ship and basically had an icebreaker, but they had to remove that armor belt off of the bow in the 20s because the ship was top heavy and wouldn't handle heavy seas very well. So they had to remove that armor belt to save some weight up front. And they also reduced the secondary armament for, again, weight savings, as well as places that they had them weren't very useful. And more importantly, they increased the gun elevation so that they could fire further, because 14,500 yards is not enough. And so they did increase the elevation of the guns to, I believe it was 17 degrees or 19 degrees, which gave them enough range to be useful.
How about speed parameters? Because in game, I mean, I'm doing around 18, maybe top to 19 knots when I'm
Yeah.
not making a turn. How would that translate to historical values of the ship? Because as you mentioned, it was the first dreadnought for the French, I guess, like dreadnought class
Yeah.
battleship for the French. But did they had, because if I remember correctly, sorry, I'm going on a train of thought here. Dreadnought impressed everyone because of her speed, as
Yeah.
well of the fact that she was embarking such a large armament in such big number. But her speed was what the big factor.
Yeah.
How would Courbet compare to her on a direct?
Courbet was slower.
Slower.
So you could get up to 20 knots-ish probably, but reality was you were going to be going like 18, and even then you're kind of pushing her. She was not exactly a fast ship. The French didn't get into really fast ships until their modern ships, which we'll get to. And their early battleship development was plagued with a bunch of issues, so it was kind of rough. So the Courbets are they're a decent first attempt for a dreadnought, I would say, but they should have been built in 1906, not 4 years later.
I see.
So they do see service in both World Wars. In World War II, they're very much second line in reserve in World War II. Although a couple of them do get pulled out for shore bombardments during Operation Dragoon. I think there was the Paris no, it wasn't the Paris. Maybe the Lorraine. They do get pulled out for some of the battles. One of them gets expended as a block ship during the D-Day campaign, because for the Mulberry harbors, which were basically makeshift harbors that they put on the beaches of Normandy to get supplies in, they needed to create water conditions for them to work. And so one of the Courbet class gets expended as a block ship to kind of direct the water flow around. So the way that it would that they would
come and say hi.
hello.
We have Mr. Chrysanthos here. That can say hello. He's right there. Anything we can help you with? Okay.
Okay. So let's see.
Oh, the zoom on the cam. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bit of an intervention here. Let's see. Let's just see if we can fix Lane's camera for a sec. That's much better.
There we go. That's a little more.
My issue is it's automatically resetting it when I do it.
Yeah.
Yes, you see what I mean? So I'm not sure what's causing it.
Yeah. And so the Courbets by World War II are just not very good ships. They really needed a heavy modernization to really become effective ships, and they never got it. The Italians didn't modernize. So the French Navy is always looking at Italy, what they're doing. The Italians didn't modernize their ships until late in the 30s, and by that point, France was on to bigger and better things, and so they never got to it. So the Courbets do see service in World War I as well. They get sent around the Mediterranean mainly. They serve a little bit during the Gallipoli campaign, but majority of their time is spent off of the coast of Italy, watching out for Austrian ships. And they don't see a ton of action there, but they do help in some bombardment missions. So,
how many of the Courbet class were built? You mentioned it maybe once. I didn't quite catch it. If you have any.
I don't remember exactly. I want to say it was 4.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember the numbers, but there was a decent amount of Courbet class. Yeah. So one thing I didn't write down. Oh, yeah, it was 4. So and so there was really not a large battleship force by World War II for France, because they only had the Corbeils, the Bretagnes, and the Dunkirks and the Richelieus, barely in service by World War II. So there's that. We're going to let Robin finish up this game here before we move on to the next ship.
If you guys have any questions regarding the Corbeil class, what we'll try to do is just go class by class and take a bit of our time, since there's not that many ships to cover compared to the previous stream. So if you have any questions, any anecdote, anything you want to add, any details, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and we'll see if we can sort you out.
So one question of how are you supposed to pronounce Jojard?
Jojard,
Jojard.
the commander.
Yeah.
It's Robert Jojard. Yes, so you don't say Jojard like you would say for Jojo. You say Jojard, like a proper French J. And the D doesn't get pronounced. Most consonants at the end of French words are going to be completely silent.
Yeah.
So it's Robert Jojard. That's how you say it. Regarding gameplay questions and game development questions, this isn't the type of stream we want to focus our attention on. We will definitely try to answer gameplay related questions in updates. When it comes to these kind of streams, it's much more focused on the class we're covering and the nations we're covering more than this. So questions about what you see right now on the screen, or any kind of stuff related to battleships, or any kind of historical bits.
Yeah, I just saw one. So, what was the main purpose of the tripod mast? So the Corbeil was originally completed with a single pole mast, and then during the 1920s they modernized it with this tripod mast with a very dramatic, like T cross shape at the top. It gives you a few things. The main thing is that it's a fire control platform, so you can put a periscope on, not a periscope, but a rangefinder up there, and to help you get a very accurate point of range as well as high up, so you can see further. And that's that main pole. The tripod mast allows you to put more weight at the top there, so that you can get a better rangefinder, and also more stable position for that rangefinder. Because if you only have one pole, it'll vibrate around, and so that's not good.
Is there any odd features about the Corbeil? Something that was completely unique to the ship that other ships of the same class or the same era did not have?
So the Corbeil is a very conservative design, all things considered. So I guess the weirdest thing was that the secondary battery outranged the primary battery at first. The other thing is that it's using wing turrets in 1910, which have already gone out of fashion by then. Though it is using super firing turrets, which is very strange. If I remember right, it uses a mixed propulsion, or one of them uses a mixed propulsion of coal firing and oil firing, and it does incorporate coal as part of its defense systems during World War I. So and I guess the obligatory torpedo tubes question is here. So these ships did have submerged torpedo tubes whenever they were commissioned. The reason that we do not model them in game for this ship or for any other ship that had them is because either they were removed before World War II, or in the form that we have the ship in, or they are submerged tubes, and submerged tubes just don't work from a gameplay perspective. And as well as during the World Wars, or during the wars, they found that submerged torpedo tubes are basically useless. The whole Rodney hit Bismarck with a submerged torpedo is exceptional because that's the only time it happened. That's the reason we talk about it. It isn't something that is a realistic thing to do in combat.
Please. Oh my god. Shatters. Shatters on a Wyoming with HE. Let's go. Here we go. Okay, that was an interesting game to start. I'm not sure if we'll actually top that. at least at tier 3, it's pretty decent.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So-
that's the Courbet class. What really interests me, what was the equivalent on the Kaiserlich Marine of this type of ship?
So, like a ship of this type would probably be closest to the, like you could probably, like a Koenig would beat the crap out of it, gonna be honest. But a Kaiser, a Kaiser is probably your closest comparison, about the same amount of armament, and also you have the same caliber of armament, so it's quite comparable. The Kaiser is much more protected. Nominally speaking, the Kaiser is going to be a faster ship, and it's going to be longer ranged. So the Courbet is going to have a hard time against a bunch of the German ships.
One thing I saw as
period.
well is that one of the center line turret, if you can, no, the center line is on the center of the ship.
Yeah.
One of the side guns, I don't know which class it is for the Germans, but they could actually, all 10 barrels, so all 6
crossfire.
turrets could actually crossfire across decks, which is not the case for Courbet.
Yeah, and so that's one of the, I guess, disadvantages of the design. But in reality, that cross-deck firing was not ever really used. They tried to use it, and they did use it a couple times, but you would end up usually doing more damage to your own ship than you than you would the enemy.
As you'd have probably some pictures, or maybe
Yeah.
not. No, Blip showed me a picture of, I believe, was the
was
Richelieu
Richelieu,
after
yeah.
shore bombardments, and the turrets were just coated in scorches from their own firing. So, yeah, I can imagine what a 305mm would do if you shoot it above a deck.
Yeah, you would rip up your deck planking and like all sorts of pressure problems. It was firing across your deck was a noble idea. That was not very good idea.
Yeah, the meme sounds good, doesn't work.
Yeah. So the following year, they get together and they say, we actually need to build a good ship. And so they they take the Courbet design, refine it again, and they make the Britannia class. The defining feature of the Britannia class is that it increases the armament to 13.4 inch, which is 343 millimeter, if I remember right. The main advantage of this is that you get better range, but they're still only elevating to 12 degrees, so you get to like 16,000 yards rather than 14 and a half. The other thing that they go on is that they go for an all centerline battery, so your amidships turrets are no longer on the wings, and they are now on centerline, or it is now one turret centerline. So your broadside weight doesn't change, but your overall weight of the ship is decreased for the capability.
Did that impact seaworthiness by any margin? Having a centerline only main battery rather than having some side guns?
It can, because oftentimes you have to mount it higher. In the case of this ship, you do. But but essentially, the real reason people tended to stick towards wing armaments was for because basically there was internal space being used up by engines and boilers, which is why that you couldn't put a turret there. And so whenever the people started switching to turbines, they actually figured out how to get the space to put things amidships. And so
when we get to Bretagne, what era are we in now?
So we're now in the, we're still in the Dreadnought age. This is only a couple years after the Courbet class starts construction, but these don't enter service until World War II, or World War I, sorry. And they enter service in around 1915, 1916.
Okay, so,
And so
it's 4 years after the...
but they're very much just an enhanced, beefed up Courbet. The armor is basically the same. Britannia tonnage is about 18 to 19,000 tons, depending. Okay. So you're increasing by a couple thousand tons, and a lot of that is just due to the armament upgrades.
What I see is also a proliferation of anti-air calibers that popped up, which the previous Courbet did not had. I see various caliber small guns, and also they kept, I guess, the 139mm casemate secondaries, but I also see some deck guns, which are probably going to be 100mm if I'm correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So basically the Bretons get modernized much more than the Corbeil class does. So this is why they have a lot more anti-aircraft firepower.
So we see like a late Bretagne design in game, not
Yeah.
the early one. I
Yeah.
think.
So this is going to be your 1940 Breton, basically.
We could check this out by just removing the hull, maybe. Let's see where it changes. Oh yeah. The type of guns on the decks are completely different. You don't have as many anti-guns anymore. Oh yeah, that makes a big difference. Interesting. Something I don't do often is check the different details on the different hulls we have in game. And it changes drastically when you pay attention to the amount of guns on the deck which are not main battery, and then you check with the hull. It is very different.
And so so these were rushed for World War One because starting in 1913 things are starting to get stressful, and in 1914 they realized we really need to get to work on these, and they start rushing them. And so they knew that they could complete these during the war, so they start working on it. There are 3 Bretagne class ships, at least post-war, there are 3 Bretagne class ships because, if I remember right, one of them gets sunk. So the France loses a tremendous amount of their navy during World War One. A lot of them sinking due to mines and other underwater threats, including submarines. And they, if I remember right, the number was 40% of the French Navy gets sunk in is lost in World War II. And so they become a very much weaker after World War One. So Mercutio, you're going to have to ask that question again because it's lost in the chat. So I'm sorry. And so
I can scroll back up if you want.
These are part of a program that France introduces in 1912 called the Statute Naval. I probably completely butchered that, but essentially they call for having 28 battleships in service by the end of 1920. So okay, that's the question. I'll get there in a second. And so they want to have 28 battleships, which includes 11 pre-dreadnoughts, 6 of the Dantons, and 5 of the previous ships. There will be 4 Corbeil class, 3 Bretagne class, 2 Normandie class, 4 Lyon class, and 2 of a new type that they wanted to build. And that was the plan from 1912 to 1920, but the war very much destroys that plan.
Before you get going, do I have a time frame to go into a game with it?
No.
No?
So
Alright.
probably Normandy will be the next game.
We're moving to another ship then, I guess.
Yeah. So the question here is that the Bretagne was sunk, or is listed to have a maximum weight of 25,000 tons, but it was sunk with a weight of 26.75 thousand tons. So during wartime, ships always go far beyond their allotted weight. So Bretagne was loaded down with ammunition, with crew, with additional anti-aircraft armament, and a bunch of other modifications, I'm sure. And so the full load estimates are always pretty much estimates rather than the actuality of things.
All right. The Bretagne would play like a Corbeil, so gameplay-wise, we can skip over this one.
Yeah. By the end of World War One, the 3rd ship of the class Lorraine is the most modern because they increased the elevation of that ship to 17 degrees.
So they managed, because you mentioned this as well for was it the Corbeil or the Dantons? That they could elevate the guns to 17 degrees, but then the Bretagne was limited to 12 degrees earlier.
Yeah, so and that was the way that Corbeil was limited to at the beginning as well. They eventually modified them to increase to 17 degrees to get some extra range, but it wasn't the primary thing. And so these are what France fights World War One with, these 3 classes of ships in large degree. And so the way that that's the way that things turn out. During the war, basically all of the naval resources that were in construction were taken and sent to the army. And so boilers were sent to other ships, guns were sent to the army, all the workers were sent to the army. Everything was around the ground war in World War I for France. And that was just the way that things happened. And after the war, France was completely destroyed economically. And so they couldn't afford to modernize these ships as easily or start new building programs. And so that's why that these ships don't see the extensive rebuilds that the Congos get or that the Queen Elizabeths get.
So this, I think I can answer that question if you don't mind.
Go
Tell
for
me
it.
if I'm wrong. Why am I seeing park benches on tier 5 and up French BB, or did someone else answer that? You can actually find these benches on every French ships in the game, I believe. Probably not every one of them, but cruisers and destroyers will have them too. This is these benches are not deployed when the ship is in actual service. These benches would only be present on the decks of the ship in either peacetime or when they're just docked in port and the crew is just having a break, essentially. But these, I believe, are just cultural things. French people like to have resting places on their ships, and this goes into very nice wood benches. So that's why you see them in port, because that's an historical aspect as well.
Yeah. I think you're on the money there. They talk a lot about how they would rejig the ships for wartime, and they would remove like all of the fixtures and anything flammable, and would completely redo things for wartime.
Can't see them on this ship, but if I go to my tech tree really quickly and I boot the Galissonière, I'm pretty certain.
There's one on the.
Not on Galissonière.
think
Oh
they're-
yes, they are. Right here next to the two turrets. Let me
Yep.
just go full screen for a sec. Right next to the safety buoy here, you can see the benches on the side of the ship.
Yep.
It's a bit dark in the New York port, but yes, it's not only on battleships. It's on all kind of French ships.
Indeed. So before World War One, they are looking into. They really want to get into the ball game of battleship building, and they know that Britannia is a first-generation super dreadnought. She's kind of already behind the times by the time that she's going to be into service, and so the plan is that they will go for the Normandy. They're just going to jump. They're going to jump the ship, and go to quadruple turrets, completely bypass triple turrets, and they're going to go for the full bird. And so the Normandy design was under construction during World War I, where you have 3 quadruple gun turrets with 340 millimeter guns.
Before we keep going, I kind of want to say that meme is where this is where the fun starts.
This is where the fun begins.
The fun begins. My bad. Oh my god, I can't even say the meme right.
So,
Sorry.
in their original form, the Normandy class was basically going to be virtually identical in terms of hull to a Bretagne and to a Corbeil and to a Danton. They weren't going to be increasing the armament and protection too much for these ships. The main upgrade was going to be the main armament.
So the Normandy itself never existed.
Well, there was
not the namesake of the ship, sorry, but the actual ship as depicted in legends.
So it never was completed like this. It was under construction. All 4 of the Normandies were under construction, or 5 actually, were under construction during the war. But World War I happens. They aren't in a complete enough state for France to justify finishing them during the war. So their resources are sent off to finish destroyers. Their boilers are sent to finish destroyers. Their guns are sent to the front lines for army use, and they aren't complete. So they sit around in the dry docks. If they can launch them, they do that. And one of them, the 5th one, Baron, survives long enough to be converted into an aircraft carrier in the 1920s. But the rest of them end up being scrapped. And then why does France use or not use like one of the standard caliber sizes, like 14-inch? It's just what they had.
We like to be special.
They do
if
like
you look
to
at
be-
history, we do like to be a bit special with our choices of stuff.
They also tend to like their round numbers a little bit. So 340 millimeter looks nicer than 356. To an extent, they go with 380 rather than 381.
And since we use the metric system, the
based in-
the inch is not the same.
Yeah. So,
Oh, the benches are during the action. No, that's not
Yeah.
historical.
well,
You
yeah.
can see the benches at the back of the turrets here. If I come on, switch the camera. Barely at the bottom of the screen here.
Yeah. So so that was the idea behind these ships. So the reason that France skips to the quadruple turrets, and so the reasoning because of that is essentially it all comes down to what are the dry docks that France has. Almost all of their ship designs are limited by dry docks and their ability to build them and maintain them. And so the quadruple turrets allows them to pack the most firepower that they can onto a short hull, which allows them to fit into the majority of their dry docks, not only in France, but also in Algeria and in Morocco and elsewhere in the world, because France at this time is the second largest empire on the planet. So they have to be able to send their forces overseas. The downside of using a quadruple turret is that it's complex. They're very large, very heavy, and they're linked. And essentially the design for all French quadruple gun turrets is that it's 2 turrets in 1 casing. So you have so they're divided in the middle by a bulkhead, which is why there's a space between guns 2 and 3.
I see. So it was so one turret was essentially 2 different main compartments.
Yes.
Was it the same for like ammunition hoists, magazines?
Yeah.
Was it split as
So
well?
they're almost entirely in a different system. So
Okay.
magazine hoists would be separate and go up to feed 2 guns, and they would essentially they could be fired separately. In the later ships, I'm not sure about the Normandy turrets, but in the later ships, each gun could move independently, but it was a limit on how far that they could move for each gun. But you could have the pairs move quite large. The reason that's not implemented in game in terms of being knocked out is because essentially our physics engine does not allow it, and so it can't be done.
So when they were designing the Normandy, they wanted to have a massive leap in speed. Is this correct or not? Because
No.
in game the Normandy is a blessing when it comes to speed
Yeah.
compared to the previous tunes.
So the original design for Normandy would have been a 21 knot ship. So the reason that the Normandy is so fast in game is because there was a bunch of proposals after the First World War when they were looking at finishing these ships. Again, considering that if finances weren't as much of a concern, there was a bunch of investigations in how can we make these more modern and more powerful and fit with the new paradigm of battleship combat that was exposed at Jutland, where you need to have some speed, you need to have much greater range than these were designed for. And so one of the designs they looked at involved lengthening the hull as well as like packing in basically more boilers and turbines to get things going. And so that the model of Normandy we have in game reflects one of these designs where they increase the speed by a ton. And this is mainly for gameplay reasons because the armor isn't there to support it being so slow. And so this is very much not a World War I Normandy design. I have a picture that I'll show you of what that would look like. Actually, that's a Bretagne in World War I. That is also another Bretagne later on, but still World War I. And this is Bretagne post-rebuild. And this is what a artist's representation of what Normandy would have looked like in around World War I, around 1917, 1918. And so you can see that it is, it's shorter, essentially. The other class that they were designing at this time was the Lyon class, which is basically just a longer Normandy with an extra gun turret. They decided that they were going to they were going to expand the dockyards and could sacrifice in like colonial areas, and so they designed a Normandy with a +1 turret. We're not entirely sure of what the historical layout would have been for those ships, because the designs don't seem to have been entirely finalized. Because I have seen some sketches, at least from US newspapers reporting on these ships, that it would have been 2 super firing turrets fore and aft rather than distributed layout. But from what we understand, the French designs were a distributed layout, so that's what we went with. And that would be the Lyon. I don't have any photos to show for Lyon. I'm sorry, and we probably won't get any gameplay because Normandy is. It's just a Normandy with more guns.
Oh, we have to play the Lyon at least once.
Do we?
Just have the chat ask us some questions in the meantime. I mean, I am a bit struggling right now with her.
And I've probably got some things to go through here in terms of history as well.
Yeah, well, I'll just try to finish that match, which may take a while.
Yeah, and so none of the Lyons got really anywhere. If I remember right, they did start building a few of them, but they were quickly canceled. So super firing means that a turret is above another turret and shooting over it. So Normandy doesn't have any super firing guns, but you look at, like, if you look at an Iowa, the second turret is super firing over the first turret, and that's what that means. It's a very important development. It's one of the defining features of a super dreadnought, although it's not a required feature of a super dreadnought. And so that's what a super firing turret is. And so one of the ideas that they did throw around for the Normandy class was having 15-inch guns, but they decided that it would not be ready in time for building the Normandies, because designing and building a reliable gun is a very long process and takes years. So they knew that they could get the 340 millimeter quad guns out, and so they went with that rather than the 15-inch. Though they're already looking towards, in the future, jumping the boat and going a little bit, going a bit larger. And so I guess one of the things to keep in mind is that France is building up their whole time their dry dock support. By 1914, they only have 5 dry docks that are capable of servicing a large ship on the like a Normandy, and building these ships. So there's very much a limitation on that. And so the middle turret of Nelson would be super firing. And so coming out of World War I, France has lost 40% of their navy. And so, and they had no viable construction plans at the time. They didn't have the money for it, and they just didn't have the time. And the Normandies were not modern enough for for new construction after the war. The deck armor was not there for the ship, and they knew that they needed to modify the designs very heavily for it to be even worth it. And so they ended up canceling most of them. And so in 1921, in 1921, the Washington Naval Treaty happens, and France is limited to a budget of 70,000 tons of new ship designs. So the French Navy was roughly okay with this. They weren't very happy with being equal with Italy, because they felt that their second largest empire in the world, much larger than Italy's empire, And so they were upset with this because they felt that they had greater needs. And so they decided that they needed to focus more on cruiser development rather than battleship development because they could do that.
Well, definitely not as fun of a game as we had in the Courbet, that's for sure.
Yep. So you want to do the Lyon?
You guys want to have a Lyon game and you can ask random questions. What I see as well on the Lyon is the quad secondary turret,
Yep.
which
So
is also pretty good looking.
yeah, those aren't part of the original design. Those are based off of Dunkirk's quadruple turrets. But it makes sense that they would redo it.
I know, chat. You all want to see the 16 guns go off. I completely agree, and it will happen. Another fun fact about the Normandy class was that they revolutionized the engine setup. Question was, Legend, would you say that the vertical triple expansion steam engine had a huge impact on further development?
So the vertical triple expansion steam engine helped a lot in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, but was very quickly superseded by the turbines or turbine engines, and the vertical triple expansion engines were well outdated by World War I. So there were clear advantages to using a turbine engine, especially once geared turbines come in, and there's no reason to continue developing vertical triple expansion after World War I. But the Normandy class was designed to use triple expansion engines for greater fuel economy, because at the time geared turbines were not really a thing, and so it was a little bit rough. We will go into the history of the Dunkirk. Just stay tuned. We have to get there first.
Don't worry. Yes.
Let's see here. So yeah, the Lyons were never finalized or laid down. So sorry, I was wrong about that. But the Normandies were started. So but they were halted due to the war effort, and all of their parts got scattered around everywhere. So if they wanted to finish the Normandies, they would have to rework the design because of new knowledge, and they would have to basically rebuild everything to actually do things.
High explosive. Okay, I can turn both to that.
So basically, the reason that Bairn was more or less chosen for the carrier conversions was because it was not necessarily it was the least progressed of all of the ships, and it was still on the stocks. It wasn't launched, and so they could work on it a little bit easier. And so they chose it for carrier conversions. It was a terrible carrier. God, it was a terrible carrier. But it did see service in World War II, kind of. Didn't really do very much. Basically, transforming a 21-knot battleship into an aircraft carrier is not a good idea. And so that was, yeah.
That was bad.
It was not a good idea to do that. But it worked. Well, it worked enough. So after World War I, the most modern battleship that France has is the Lorraine, which is the last of the Bretagne class. And so but if you compare Lorraine to a contemporary battleship, you're looking at a New Mexico, you're looking at a Queen Elizabeth, you're looking at a Fuso or an Issei class even. The Bretagne gets completely blown out of the water by any of these ships, in my opinion. And so they knew that it was very short range, and they needed to completely redo their process for building a battleship. They needed a new design from the ground up. And so they knew that their ships were outdated versus almost every opponent, except for the Italians. The Italians did have some very interesting designs with triple turrets, but they knew that they were short range and just like their ships, and weren't planning on modernizing. So they could hold off on going crazy with French modernizations for the French battleships until the Italians had more. So the priority became to destroyers and cruisers because that's what France needed. France had basically no cruisers coming out of World War One,
With an emphasis on light cruisers as well.
Yes.
When they started to build them.
although they did build the Duquesne class and then the Suffren class, and into the excellent Algerie. And so they did drive some heavy cruiser development as well. And that was, and so but the ultimate death nail to the Normandy class was that France was bankrupt and the deck armor was not good at all. And they knew from the Battle of Jutland that it was not a good idea to have no deck armor, whether or not that was realistic or not. And so they basically nixed the design and decided to go new. I'm going to get a drink real quick while Robin fires 16 guns in a
I'm trying.
miraculous
Right now,
broadside.
let's say that they are slightly inconsistent and I couldn't really get a very meaty salvo out of these guns, I have to admit.
They are a bit anemic for tier 5.
The
or
caliber
tier 6.
is subpar, let's say. So you won't be overmatching a lot of armor, but you have 16 of them. I guess Lyon needs to be fought at medium range when you can really start to do like that guy, for example, has been shooting HE all game long, and maybe he has a point because you have 15 guns. At some point, some HE are actually going to start some fires. But this Scharnhorst I would like to punish eventually. He's taking torpedoes, so maybe he'll die before my shells even arrive.
Yeah. Typically, the deck wood for battleships by this point was going to be teak wood. Teak has a lot of characteristics that make it good for ship building, but it also is fairly limited supply in the world, so some places would use mahogany for shipbuilding. But by this point, there weren't as many ships, and you didn't need it as extensively, so teak would be used. In French battleships, teak is actually surprisingly extensively used. And so in the early 1920s, the Bretons are refitted quite a bit, so they get their tripod masts, they get increased gun elevation, but they're kind of limited because these ships were tightly designed, which means that they don't have a bunch of room inside of the ship to add new systems, and they're limited by that as well as by budget and these sort of things. The bow armor is removed on both the Bretons and on the Corbettes, much to the disappointment of icebreaker fans out there. And this is done to prevent them from just diving into the waves in heavy seas, because they have a lot of weight up front due to the super firing guns.
Were these quad turrets actually built on the Lyon?
They were under construction for sure. I'm not sure if any of them were ever completed. So, let's see. The proposed refit for Normandy, the extensive one, which is the one that we have in game pretty much, is that they were going to rework their propulsion entirely to get to 24, 25-ish knots. They were going to lengthen the hull. They were going to, of course, increase the gun elevation like they needed to with all of their ships. They were going to add a tripod mast like Bretagne. They were going to improve the deck armor across the hull. And they were going to add a 1 meter torpedo bulge, which would help compensate for all the added weight. And because the torpedo defenses of these ships was primitive and was not nearly up to the standards of what they would reach in World War II. And they didn't, but this refit didn't really see a whole bunch of support because of the financial considerations, and which were intense.
Yeah, I can't make that turn.
The
I
purpose
think
of
that game is going to be over anyway, so...
The purpose of a tripod mast is to increase the stability of the mast so that they could mount heavier fire control systems up there.
Not the best captain of the Lyon, am I? Yeah, this is a kind of an anemic game right now. Sorry, chat. could have been avoided went to another ship entirely at this point.
So the last battleship, there are very, very many ways you can define the last battleship, because there's Iowa classes that you could say are last battleship. John Bart, you can say the last battleship, and there's Vanguard, you could say the last battleship. Vanguard is the last new design battleship finished, so it's the last one laid down and completed, and that sort of things. The last one put into commission and completed is Jean Bart, which happens in 1949 or 51, and so and we'll kind of get there. And of course, you can also argue that whichever Iowa class was the last one in service is the last battleship. There's so many different ways you could define it that it's open to debate. We'll get into some like what a typical torpedo defense looks like a little bit later. I'll try to explain it as best as I can whenever we get to Dunkirk, because
so we can have some proper close-ups of the that game. I'm actually thinking of quitting directly to move on, and I think that's what we'll do, because I'm not going to get in range of anything at this point. Let's just move on.
So we'll move on. So in 1921, you get to the Washington Naval Treaty, which puts France on a limit of 70,000 total tons split between however many ships they want to have for capital ships. So these are battleships or battle cruisers. They set a bunch of ideas out there because they know that Italy is not going to be, Italy has the same requirements, and they know that Italy is not going to be building new battleships anytime soon, and they're focusing on cruisers. So what France is thinking is, we want to have a cruiser killer. And so designs start for either for a 17,500 ton ship. And
17,000.
17,000. So
So we're not
smaller.
getting a leap big time out of Normandy or.
Yeah. So this was the first design, and so they were looking at making this up. France was very disappointed with the results of all of the naval treaties, and ended up breaking them later on. And this is kind of their response to it. And so they start designing these new 17,500 ton ships. They want to have 12-inch guns, which are 305 millimeter guns, and they want to have high speed and enough protection against 8-inch armor, which was asking quite a lot from design in the 1920s, but they were getting pretty close to it. But however, the developments would go on, and people started building more of these 8-inch cruisers, and so they upped the design tonnage to 23,000 tons and 23,333 tons.
That's
which would
very precise.
Which would allow them exactly 3 battleships in 70,000 tons.
Hence the division, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at 17,500, you would get 4. At 23,300, you would get 3, and then you could
Much
get 2 for 35,000. And so they increase up to that. And they decide that would be the deal. But they realized that as soon as the Deutschland class cruisers come around, which is what Admiral Graf Spee is famously, they were going to need more protection to actually counter them. And so the 283 millimeter guns, which were going to be on the Deutschland class, is substantially larger than an 8-inch gun, and you need more protection against them. So the Dunkirks were upgraded and up-armed. So they go from this idea of a 12-inch gun battleship to a 13-inch gun, which is the 330 millimeter gun. And they also increase the protection significantly so that they could basically hard counter the Deutschland class. These are also pretty fast ships at like 29.5 knots.
Oh, so they were closing on 30 knots already.
Yeah, and so which is faster than any of the Deutschland class. But the cost of that is that it's 26,500 tons now. So they're much bigger than they're not going to be able to get 3 of them, and they're much bigger than they intended, and they're not getting the full value of the 35,000 ton ships for 2. And so building the construction of the Dunkirk class starts in 1932.
So they begin laying down the keels in 1932.
Yeah, and so and they go on, and but before this even they have a bunch of different really interesting designs. And including the French equivalent of admirals to the Jackie Fisher, the famous British admiral that kind of did battle cruisers. The French equivalent of that is Louis Vouillet, who is one of our commanders in game. He requests a series of designs for 37,000 ton battle cruisers, and they get designed, and they have a bunch of different armaments, and have been recently announced to be represented-ish in a form on PC, but we don't have them in game yet. And so but they don't really go anywhere because they're too heavy. They break the treaties anyway, and they wouldn't have worked. So while Dunkirk is under construction. I guess I need to answer the question. Is Dunkirk a battlecruiser or is it a battleship? In the French Navy, it was always called a battleship, full stop.
Cuirassé Dunkirk,
So
yes.
by design, during the design stages, they would say it was a battlecruiser sometimes. So croiseur de
Croiseur de bataille. I was close enough.
and
Which essentially means cruiser of battle, so it just inverted.
yeah, and so, but whenever it enters service, it's a battleship, full stop. That's what the French Navy called it. French Parliament would call them would call them everything, to be honest. They would call them anything from a cruiser to a battlecruiser to a battleship to capital ship to whatever they would think of on the Friday. But according to the French Navy, these are just basically a small battleship.
Just a
And
small
so-
anecdote. We
'Cause
know that
Sorry, go ahead.
No, we know that the Strasbourg and Dunkirk were built as an answer to the Deutschland class, the Class B.
Yeah.
What was the reaction of the royalty in the UK when they learned that when they saw the initial design of Dunkirk?
Probably the first one was flattery because it looks very superficially like a Nelson, but rip, and but the initial reaction is that these are good ships more or less, it's a solid design. However, there was no real need for worry in the UK because Hood is going to blow it out of the water. The Renown and Repulsor match for it, they were covered. Britain was covered. Italy was more concerned because Italy still has old 12-inch pre-dreadnoughts. They didn't have anything beyond a 305 millimeter gun at this time. And Dunkirk would outrange any of the Italian battleships. And so it was a hard counter to the Deutschland class, and it could deal with any of its Italian counterparts, and that was the main concerns for the French Navy. Sorry, for the French Navy. When the Dunkirks are announced, they eventually get countered more or less by the Scharnhorst class, as well as the Italians respond basically right as Strasbourg is getting set up to start getting, so there's Dunkirk and Strasbourg are the 2 ships of the class. So when Strasbourg is getting started, the Italians respond by announcing the Littorio class. So this is going to be Vittorio Veneto and Littorio, later on Roma. And so...
Oh, we're already there on that development, I see.
And so Strasbourg gets beefed up. It gets, the armor belt is angled even further on Strasbourg. It is thicker. They increase the thickness of the bulkhead armor pieces as well as on the turrets. Strasbourg also has a slightly different bridge arrangement, where it has a Admiralty bridge as well as a Captain's bridge. And so the advantage of having only front-facing turrets for these ships is that it means that they save weight. You can make your citadel, so the citadel is the space that is most heavily protected in a ship and weighs the most. And so you can, if you put your turrets only in the front, your citadel space only has to cover those turrets and your engines. And so you can make your citadel space shorter and therefore lighter. And that is the design philosophy. The quadruple gun allows you to have even less turrets, which saves weight. And so that's the idea behind it. And so the Dunkirk also introduces a bunch of different advances. It has the perfected omni-purpose shell. It does not actually have, as far as we're aware, it never actually carried a high explosive shell. There seems to have been one developed for the gun, but it's not in any of the records for the ship. And so the shell seems to be tailored for killing cruisers. It's a very heavy explosive charge in the shell compared to other types of shells. So most battleship AP shells, 2% of the weight is explosive. And the Dunkirk's is 3.5%, which doesn't seem like much, but you're almost doubling the explosive weight of your AP shell compared to what it should be.
Talking about shells being tailored to deal against cruisers, that would be a good example, I think.
Yeah, and like for context, a Dunkirk shell is a 13-inch shell, right? It has more explosive and more explosive power than Iowa's 16-inch shells do.
Excuse me?
Yes, the explosive power of a Dunkirk armor-piercing shell is greater than that of an Iowa armor-piercing shell.
Question: did the Dunkirk still boasted the variable fuse? You mentioned it.
Yes.
Or not? Oh, okay, so it did. All right.
Yeah.
And I cannot overmatch a Devonshire, so I need to wait until she's broadside. About no, it's fine.
Yeah. So the advantage of such a thing is that it will do significantly more damage after it penetrates something, but it's a little bit less likely to penetrate something. And so that's the cost.
I'm about to get ruined by this synop.
And so Dunkirk also beat. So basically, these 330 millimeter shells are like exceptionally strong for their size. They're very good guns. The problem is with the turrets, the guns are mounted very close together, and so they did have a bit of blast interference. And so they would have kind of crazy dispersion sometimes, which is why it has it in game. And so that was some of the trade-offs. Those shells were very, very good, but they did have a downside. The ship is not designed for slugging it out with a modern battleship. It's designed to slug out with modern cruisers.
Cruisers, yes.
So,
as you can see with the armor scheme in game,
Yeah.
it is vulnerable to every kind of battleship AP, which is why I'm hiding from this synop right now.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm gonna get absolutely wrecked if I'm not careful. Regarding the historical armor of the Dunkirk, was these ships well protected for their time, or were they?
So against cruisers, yes, they're like against their design targets. These ships are fine. Against real battleship caliber guns, no.
Not really. Okay.
So Strasbourg, kind of, you can argue, but the belt of Dunkirk is only 225 millimeters thick, which is 9 inches, roughly, which is not very much. It is angled, which is good. Any angle on a belt will help you, but it's not enough to resist a heavy shell. The armor quality is pretty good too. but it's not. But again, it's not enough to compensate for how thin it is, relatively speaking. The Dunkirk class also comes in with a brand new revolutionary torpedo defense system that nobody else uses. On the surface, it looks very similar to a United States setup, where you have essentially what you have is a series of bulkheads. There are two Dunkirks. There are two in the Dunkirk class.
Yeah,
But
there
you
was
have-
two Django. There was Dunkirk and Strasbourg. There was two Dunkirks.
And so you have an outer wall, and you would have a mixture of spaces that are empty spaces and liquid-filled spaces. And then you would have an inner wall that's a bulkhead. It's a heavy, flexible bulkhead that is designed to basically to absorb the impact, but not break into the side of the ship. And that's the idea. So essentially, you know that you can't stop the power of a torpedo explosion, so you have to absorb it over time and space. Dunkirk's is basically very similar to that of, say, an Iowa's, except it's deeper than Iowa's is. So it's actually, in theory, more protected than Iowa is against a torpedo, in reality. It also uses a very interesting thing called ebonite.
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 Mousse ebonite.
Yeah.
Ebonite foam, essentially. That's how you would call it.
It's basically they're rubber blocks, like bricks, basically. That's basically rubber that is hydrophobic, and so it expels water. And so some of the void spaces in Dunkirk and in Richelieu are filled with these little blocks, and so they basically keep water out. Problem is that it also keeps water onto the walls on the inside, so you do get some rust problems if you have them longer than 20 years, which is what happens on Richelieu and Jean Bart later. But the advantage is that you have even more protection against torpedoes and flooding. And so it's a very interesting concept that nobody else does. There is also another downside with it, is that if you get hit by a torpedo, it's very likely that you're also going to have oil in the water, and the rubber absorbs that oil and then becomes flammable. And so with flammable material inside of your ship is not very good, especially whenever you're having to then repair that damage with blowtorches. And so Dunkirk does catch on fire a few times due to this at some points. But overall, I would say it's better for combat, not so good for maintenance. And they were also the first battleships to use unit propulsion machinery, which means that they would have their boiler rooms connected to the engine rooms that were necessary, and they would have they had two sets. So they had boiler room, engine room, and so which is a different layout of machinery than older battleships, which allows them to be a little bit more compact as well as more subdivided. It's the first battleship to use this, not the first ship to use this. But another design flaw in this ship, though, was that the bow design is very thin. And so in heavy weather, these ships did not...
Don't let me interrupt you.
Robin, you can't do that.
I'm here for the gameplay, as promised.
And so the bow on the Dunkirks were very thin and prone to damage. And in heavy weather, basically it was basically submerging. It would cut into the water and basically fall in. It wasn't buoyant enough. This is the same problem that the Iowas had, although I don't think the Iowas had it as badly as the Dunkirks did. And so it did have some problem.
Okay, so Dunkirk, first ship to actually use literal rubber foam as self-sealing torpedo protection. There was none of that design were ever used in previous ships.
In previous battleships, for sure. I don't know about cruisers, but and that was but it was the first battleship to make use of it. And other than the Richelieu class later, it was the only battleships to use it.
We'll get to it eventually. Okay, that was a decent game. I'm actually glad I had it on stream. Let's just make a pause on the historical part here. It was a fun game. Congrats to my teammates, because that Dallas actually carried me as well. Good job. I was scared of the scene up a little bit, but good display of Dunkirk while Mr. Princeblip here was just getting all the historical aspect in it.
Yeah,
Well done.
and we will get onto the Mers el-Kabir events after I cover the Richelieu class. But basically, Dunkirk and Strasbourg have very short careers. They enter service in the late 1930s, and then they're basically out of the war by 1943. And so Dunkirk gets sunk at Mers el-Kabir, but it's repaired and sent to Toulon. Strasbourg escapes, goes to Toulon, and then both of them are scuttled there whenever Germany invades France again. And so to prevent them falling into the German hands, and then they're scrapped there.
Yeah.
And so but as they're developing, or as they're building up Strasbourg, they are going to, the Littorios get announced, which are big, scary battleships. They're full 35,000 ton, actually 40,000 ton battleships, and armed with 15-inch guns. France needs a counter to this. And so through some finagling and creative interpretation, they get around the Washington Naval Treaty. And so the Littorios get announced in early July 1934. 2 weeks later, the specifications for the next series of battleships are given to the naval designers. So,
Wow.
which is,
So call of a quick response.
yeah, it's like Italy's building big battleships. We're going to be like, damn the treaties, we're building them too.
So there was some kind of panic regarding this a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
Like
It's,
they were really concerned that they would get outgunned, outmatched by any new classes, and
Yeah.
they had to answer as soon as possible.
yeah, like imagine something getting through French bureaucracy in 2 weeks.
That's a burn I'm gonna allow to pass because he's right. Lots of levels here. It kind of hits home, I have to admit.
I'm sorry, but
No, don't think. It hasn't changed. You know, it was 75 or more years ago. Hasn't changed yet.
and so these specifications was 35,000 tons, 8 to 9 15-inch guns, or 16-inch guns, and with a speed of 30 knots, armor belt of 360 millimeters, and a torpedo defense system as in Dunkirk. And then it was desirable to have a homogeneous design that would work well with the Dunkirks.
We're talking about the Richelieus here.
Yes, so this is the design for the Richelieus laid out. And so the design one was basically Richelieu, and it's essentially just a bigger Dunkirk. And then essentially the design, there was design 2 and 3, which are variations of forward armament arrangements with triple and twin turrets. And then design 3 was triple 15-inch turrets in a Nelson configuration. It's basically just a faster Nelson. And then design 4, or rather, sorry, design 4 was the fast Nelson. 2 and 3 were the weird ones. And then design 5 is the really, really weird one, where they have secondary and AA armament up front and behind. They have the superstructure, then they have one turret facing forward and one turret facing backwards amidships.
Okay, so only 2 quad guns with a very weird design.
Yes. There are some engineering advantages with it. You minimize citadel space again. And also your gun turrets and magazines are in the thickest portion of the ship, which means they're the most protected area of the ship. But you lose a ton on firing arcs.
Yes,
and
and the weight
tactical
distribution
ability.
of the ship would be extremely centered.
Yeah, and so it was a engineering solution to a question that was not answered or asked.
Essentially an overcomplification.
Yeah, and so.
No, that's not an English word.
But it was the most weight compliant of all the designs. None of the designs were 35,000 tons. The design 1 was 350 tons over. The other ones were even more. And so, and they also ruled out entirely 16-inch guns because it would be too heavy.
You actually see the apparition of some meaty secondary armaments of 152 millimeter model. I think it's MLE, and model is. Let's check the statistics really quickly. until 1931, which were essentially light cruiser guns that you could find on
These are the
ships
those are the
Edison here.
1936. So
Oh, the secondary guns.
yeah, the 100 millimeter guns are the 31s.
Oh, no. You're right. My bad. 1936, which you could
Yep.
find on ships like Edison. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so in reality, I'm going to make up for some photos real quick.
Let's see them.
So this is the only photo I was able to find on public access of Dunkirk that's any reasonable quality. This is her after her battle damage at Mers el Kabir. The garage door looking thing on the stern of Dunkirk, that is a aircraft hangar. So this is Richelieu after her post-America refit in 1943.
Which brought a lot of Beauforts, I'm gonna guess.
Yeah, this is also Richelieu in 1944, I want to say. Might be 43 still. This is Richelieu in New York. This is her she's going backwards underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, or maybe it's forwards. But you notice that the top is cut off. Basically, they cut off the fire control systems, so it would fit underneath the Brooklyn Bridge.
Not only her top is cut off, but one of her barrel is missing
Yeah.
on the second turret.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay.
And so that
Interesting.
happens due to certain things.
All right.
And then this is also her in New York. This is a fantastic photo.
We can also almost replicate that photo, more or less, because the New York port behind it, I guess.
Yeah. And so,
Sorry, don't let me interrupt.
and so these, and then this is Jean Bart, which is Richelieu's sister ship in Casablanca, Morocco. She is incomplete in this photo, and we will also get there soonish. And so the Richelieu class makes use of a new boiler design called the Sorel boiler, which is basically it's the same power as a Dunkirk boiler, but it is even more compact. They're super compact boilers for how much power they put out, and so they're able to reduce their engine spaces by a whole subdivision. And so
And add more engines.
no,
okay.
They're able to get basically the same power in less space.
Oh, okay.
And
So you would you would think they would, if they gain more space, they would just add more engines of the same size to get even more power for the same
but
size in the end.
At this, when you're talking about a 31 knot battleship,
Okay.
adding more power becomes exponential to get more speed.
Oh,
so
yeah, I see.
there's not much point. You get more weight savings by saving a subdivision in your ship. And so that was the advantage. That was the main advantage there. And so these ships are very much a treaty violation because France has built two 26,000-ton battleships, 26,500-ton battleship, and they're only supposed to build up to 70,000. And now they're ordering another 70,000 tons of battleship, and so on top. Basically, they were mad. And they were already slighted by the first naval treaty. They didn't sign the second naval treaty. The Navy didn't, but the politicians did.
Wait, is that even legal?
Yes, because the politicians signed it. But the Navy didn't agree with it, and France didn't really agree with it. And then Britain goes out of their way and signs another treaty allowing Germany to start building a bunch of battleships, which France did not agree with too in the slightest, because it was against the Treaty of Versailles. It was against all of the French preconceptions. And so they say, screw the treaty, we're going to build battleships. And I don't blame them. Italy was already cheating, Japan was cheating, Germany was cheating.
Why? Might as well. I mean, it's only fair game at this point.
Britain was cheating with Germany. It's like America was probably cheating. Everybody was cheating all around. Goodbye, Pepe. And so they decided to build these things. They basically build these new ships. They get to mostly complete Richelieu, and the goal is basically that they can get them in service before World War II, but they don't. Richelieu is mostly complete by the time that World War II gets going. She evacuates to Dakar off of the west coast of Africa, or on the west coast of Africa, and John Bart barely makes it out of Saint-Nazaire before the Germans get there. Essentially, Jean Bart is not in any sort of complete state. They rush it, they rush it, they get together, and they get basically all the crew, all the crew and dock workers they can together, and they throw in the boilers. They get everything that they need to get the ship running, and also have to dredge out a whole canal to get Jean Bart out of there. While they're getting Jean Bart out of Saint-Nazaire, the Germans attack, and so she is sailing out with, a turret, some guns, and nothing else basically, and the Germans bomb Jean Bart on her way out. She also gets jammed in the canal, but they land a 100-kilogram bomb in between the front two turrets, but it doesn't do very serious damage. And so and Richelieu survives through Dakar and serves on. We'll get to them in a minute here. So before we go on to Mers el-Kabir and all that hullabaloo, does anybody have any questions?
Mers el-Kabir is going to be a long ride.
Yep.
So get the questions out of the way regarding the Richelieu. I would have one question though. Why was the decision to furnish the ship with such a large secondary battery for the time, like cruiser-like secondary battery? And was the kind of caliber unusual to find as a secondary battery on a battleship of the time? It
wasn't very unusual. The Nelsons had 6-inch or 152 millimeter secondary batteries, and they knew that the Littorios were likely going to have them. And so it wasn't super unusual. The French 152 millimeter batteries on the Richelieu class were supposed to be dual purpose. Didn't really work. They were supposed to be anti-aircraft.
Elevation was an issue on most cases. That's what I read, at least.
Yeah, and so they didn't really work like that, but that was the idea. No French battleship were part of the Big Seven. Big Seven are only Japan, Britain, and the United States. We'll get to the Massa versus John Bart in a minute. That's after Mers el-Kabir. And so and the reason that they go for the secondary armament on the rear that they have with the 3 guns rather than 2 center line is essentially space, as well as they get more guns so they can cover more areas basically in case of like a destroyer attack. That's the idea. And only 2 Richelieus get built. There were 2 more ordered. And so there was the Clemenceau ordered, who was going to be built, and it was going to have a refined secondary layout, which would be a center line, 2 turrets in the rear. And then there was also going to be Gascon built. And Gascon is in the game with 2 turrets, 1 forward and 1 aft. And that was going to be the 4th Richelieu class. So the Gascon is technically a Richelieu class battleship.
Yes, but no.
You can debate it.
Okay.
The Champagne is made up basically by us. So it's not a really historical design. It's basically a lighter weight Gascon hull. I guess I'll go over the guns real quick before we get into Mers el-Kabir. The 15-inch guns on the Richelieu class are exceptionally powerful 15-inch guns. In my opinion, they're the 2nd most powerful 15-inch gun in World War II. They still have the Omni-purpose armor-piercing shell, but they do have eventually an HE shell made for them, but not during World War II. And then the they in terms of firepower, they're actually very comparable to an American 16-inch /45 Mark VI gun. So this is the gun that you would see on Massachusetts and on Alabama and on North Carolina. Basically, the Richelieu's firepower, gun per gun, is equal to that. Essentially, the Richelieu has a lighter weight shell, higher velocity, much higher velocity, and so the shell, the way that the shell is designed for the French battleship, allows it to penetrate a very similar amount of armor at all ranges, and it will also do more post-penetration damage than the 16-inch gun of the Americans. So just because the explosive power of these guns is larger. The most powerful 15-inch gun would be on the Littorios, in my opinion, just because when they're using good shells, they're very accurate and they have an exceptionally high velocity and penetration and range. And they proved it by straddling a cruiser very closely at 33,000 yards. I'm not going to talk about the Republique because, as far as I know, there is no design for Republique, and it's mostly probably made up, would be my guess. And then, of course, there is another design that they were planning on doing after the Richelieu class, which was the Alsace class. And essentially, Alsace is a Richelieu with an additional quadruple turret on the rear, and it's like 40 to 45,000 tons. I can't remember the exact details.
Don't worry, guys. At the end of the stream, we will do a how to pronounce French battleship's name with Robin.
Yep.
And you will repeat after me in a very, very class-like manner. Okay?
And so Alsace and Bourgogne are real designs. They're basically the same design. Bourgogne is just more modern. Oh yeah, we need to send out the poll for the next episode.
Right,
But,
we'll do this. I mean, we still have time. The stream may be a bit longer than an hour because we haven't yet covered Jean Bart.
Yeah.
And, sorry, than an hour, than 2 hours. But yes.
And so
will be
the Alsace design is a real design that the French were considering, and it's very close to what we believe is the final design. We don't know for certain what the final design is. There is another design or a couple other designs. One of them is represented as Flander in the PC version of the game with triple turrets in a conventional layout, but then with 15-inch guns. And there's another design that has Gascon turrets in a conventional layout. And so we're not sure which one was chosen. Basically, all three were runners-up, with the 16-inch guns being the least likely. And the version that we see on the PC version of World of Warships with quadruple gun turrets is probably the design that they were going to go with, in my opinion. Oh, is Alsace completely wrong? Really? The difference between Alsace and Bourgogne is basically like the difference between Richelieu and Jean Bart. It's pretty much the same sort of thing. So let's see if I've got anything else here.
What is the bench? The bench? What is the bench? What is the best French battleship? Oh my
Best
God,
looking.
Robin, can I just read a question normally? My bad. What is the best looking French battleship, in your opinion?
So the best looking, in my opinion, it's Dunkirk
Dunkirk?
or Strasbourg. It's really close between the two of them.
I would agree with Dunkirk because she has simpler lines and less stuff laying around on her deck. And I really like the quad secondary turrets. I feel like they look fantastic, and I wish we had... Since we get creative with some ships, I wish we had some kind of destroyer wisdom. Just, I don't know, just for fun. But that's just my own dream. Just a destroyer with like, I don't know, just a Smolensk syndrome or light cruiser with these guns would be great.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, when it comes to when it comes to looking very mean, the Richelieu kind of takes the cake. I would
Yeah.
even put it over Jean Bart. If we put like a little bit less, just go with the hunter camo. My bad. And by the way, someone asked, I'm running the grass flag on the Richelieu. But yeah, I mean, it just looks intimidating.
Yeah.
And you still have, even with these turrets, you still have the compartmented layout.
Yep.
I just realized that game was entirely played in this overlay, and I'm really sorry about it. So yeah, you still have the same turrets split in half. They kept that design on every quad turrets they created, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a good question. What is the angled smokestack all about? Essentially, the angled smokestack allows you to have in this design, you see that it's on the aft mast, and it allows you to direct your smoke flow to where it's not blocking your line of sight anywhere. And in some of the even later French battleship designs, it's even mobile. So it will move opposite of the front guns.
Oh, you
What-
mean
by
actually
design.
rotate?
So like the actual later French funnel designs actually have a sort of rotary mechanism to them, to where that they would stay completely out of line of sight based off of where your front turrets were facing.
That's amazing.
It's completely weird.
But hey, as long as it works.
Yeah, you might actually be able to see that on Gascon.
On
You can pull it up.
Gascoigne, let me check. We had a quick question from
Zoom into that.
Coyote that asks, were the French ever tried to build more than a 4-gun turret, like let's say 5?
No.
No. Okay.
So and you can't see it on Gascon.
No.
You might be able to see it on Alsace, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's the same funnel throughout.
Yep.
I mean, it's time, isn't it?
And so basically my opinion in terms of best looking ship, it's either going to be Strasbourg or it's going to be Richelieu. I don't like John Bart so much because of the Borg cube superstructure.
Yeah.
Is a bit it's a bit Long Island. And so but yeah, the French battleships are some of the best looking from the World War. And so we shall move on to the probably the most sensitive topic that we'll cover on the stream, which is Mers el Kabir. Mers el Kabir is a tragedy on all fronts that results in the deaths of thousands of French crew. Sorry if that was noisy, that repositioning there. And it all results, in essence, from communication failure. And so so France is going to surrender to Germany, and Britain knows this, and Germany is just winning the ground war. And so the French fleet gets moved to various ports in Casablanca, in Mers el Kabir, and Dakar. The French at this point in time have one of the largest, or pretty much the largest, navy in Europe, other than Italy. In continental Europe, they're definitely the second largest, if not the largest. And so Britain absolutely does not want Germany or Italy getting their hands on the French new battleships and on the French ships in general. And the English or the British translation of the French treaty with Germany, so you're translating from French to British, or to English, sorry, defines that the French Navy will be disarmed underneath the control of Germany. And so this is kind of a failure of translation. And this is the first sort of communication failure. In reality, it would be under the supervision of German like officers, but the French would be doing the disarmament. And in reality, Germany had no plans to take the French Navy at this point in time. And so basically they didn't have the crew, they didn't really have the manpower or the fuel or the resources to even take over such a thing. They weren't very much interested in it. But the British were very, very seriously, and especially Churchill, was very seriously worried about the French Navy falling into German hands. The French head of the French Navy, Admiral Darlan, was wishy-washy. So he would say at the beginning that the French Navy will never surrender to the Germans and we will fight on to the end. And then a week later he would say the French Navy will never surrender to the Germans, but we'll stop fighting. And then the next week is we're going to follow the treaty, and then they'll go back on his word, say we're never surrendering to the Germans, and then we'll fight on. And he just goes back and forth on all of his different public statements, and Britain decides they can't trust anything he says because he's changing his opinion all the time and what he's saying, and he's just seems to be saying whatever fits the moment, and so they can't trust him.
One question I would have is, was he the only porte-parole? Like, was he the only person, the only contact that the British Admiralty could get on? Like, was he the only person able to actually, speak for the entirety of the French naval forces?
So Admiral Darlan at this time is pretty much the top of the French Navy in terms of military ranks, and so he's the guy. Whatever he says goes, and if he's saying different things, nobody knows what's going on. And Britain is not the one to take risks when it comes to sea power, and so ultimately Britain decides to embark on Operation Catapult, and this is a simultaneous capture of French ships that are in British ports. It is also the delivery of an ultimatum for surrender at Mers el Kabir and at Dakar, which is where Richelieu is. I can't remember if anybody goes to Casablanca or not, but we're going to go for Mers el Kabir first, because this is the one that goes really horribly wrong. And so Britain shows up off of the coast of Mers el Kabir, where they have four French battleships moored facing the land. So their bows are pointed towards the land because of the way that the port is set up. And so then the French battleships that are there, you have Britannia, you have Provence, and you have Strasbourg and Dunkirk.
Provence, which is
one of the Britannias.
One of the Bretons. So essentially 2 Breton class and both of the Dunkirk class.
Yes. And so, and Britain does not want the Dunkirks getting away or Richelieu to get away.
So at this point, they made up their mind. It's either we capture them or we sink them in the port.
Kind of. Britain sends out a lieutenant with the ultimatum to go speak with the French admiral, which is Admiral Gensoul, at Mers el Kabir. I think he's in Strasbourg at the time, was his ship. No, maybe it was Dunkirk. But anyhow, he delivers the ultimatum to him, or tries to. The French admiral is insulted because he's only sent a lieutenant to talk to, not to the British admiral, because they're allies. It's the British admiral. They should talk to us, right? And so he refuses to see the British envoy. The British managed to get their message to Gensoul through basically one of the other French captains, I think, or another French officer. And the ultimatum gave them 5 options. I can't remember all the options offhand, but one of them was, we're going to sink you. One of them was, you can surrender to us. One of them was, if I remember right, you can sail to British ports and continue fighting on in the Free French Navy, or you can sail to a French port in the Caribbean
and be completely neutral for the rest of the war.
No, you can sail to a port in America and to a neutral country. One of Gensoul's orders was not to surrender, but he could sail to the Caribbean, to one of the French ports in the Caribbean. France still has imperial holdings in the Caribbean at this time. And so, in theory, he could have taken one of those ultimatum options, but he doesn't. Gensoul gets this ultimatum, reads it, and decides to transmit 2 options out of the 5 to his commanders. And so I'm sorry, I probably messed up what the options, but basically he transmits 2 of the options. Basically, one of them is fight on and die, and the other one is go to France and join the Free French Navy. And so, which is unfaithful to his allies, it's unfaithful to his superiors, and it's unfaithful to basically anything that he's supposed to do, in my opinion. And so, naturally, the French Admiralty says, we can't risk Germany punishing us for sending our entire fleet to go join the British. So you're going to fight and die. Because all they know, that's all they know. They don't know the other options on the table. And so...
Oh, wow. So, okay, if I understand, out of the 5 options the British gave Gensoul, Gensoul goes to his superiors and only proposes 2.
Yep.
Okay.
And so, and all this time, the British are delaying. The British have put a timer, and they go beyond that timer. They give to France extra time to respond. And all this time, the French are starting their boilers and getting their ships ready to go because they don't know what the option is or what's going to end up happening. So they need to be ready for anything. And so Britain knows this. They can see the smoke coming and coming up. And so they're like, all right, time's up. And they open fire. I think it's at 7:25 in the afternoon, or maybe it's 5:25 in the afternoon. And and essentially Britain says, it's Admiral Cunningham at the area, basically.
We can't take no more risk.
Yeah, we can't take the risk, and they're being stubborn, and like, as regrettable as this is, we're going to shoot you. And so the British force here is HMS Hood, HMS Resolution, and HMS Valiant. So you have Hood, you have one of the Queen Elizabeth class battleships, and one of the Revenge class battleships, all armed with 15-inch guns. Dunkirk, or none of the ships there are designed to fight anything with a 15-inch gun. And so essentially, right off the bat, the guns fire. Strasbourg lets go of her leashes and gets sailing immediately, and she's booking it, and she makes it around the turn, and she's gone.
Okay.
Like she's within a few minutes. Some of the destroyers there lay down a smoke screen. One of them is the Mogador. She gets sunk.
Mogador gets sunk there. Okay.
And I think another one is Vacolon. And she gets and Mogador gets sunk there. But and so Strasbourg is booking it out of there. We'll get to her in a minute. And so Dunkirk delays for 4 minutes. So basically, she was still tied to the pier for 4 minutes. She was not supposed to. And there's a whole investigation that's very interesting about that. But she gets lets loose and starts moving, and immediately gets hit by 4 15-inch shells in a single salvo, and catastrophically loses power and loses the ability to control herself. And so she's sailing towards the beach, and there's no choice that she has about the matter. And so the Britannia takes 2 15-inch shells to the aftmost, the rearmost main magazines, and detonates.
Just blows up entirely.
Blows up entirely, and
meanwhile, sorry to interrupt. Gensoul was on site.
What?
Where was Gensoul in?
Gensoul is in Dunkirk.
Is in Dunkirk. Okay.
So and he survives, as far as I remember, but doesn't keep his career.
So you would expect.
And so Britannia takes 2 15-inch shells to the main magazines and detonates. And it takes 2 more midships, so basically through the belts, and detonates again because it detonates the secondary magazine.
Wow. Okay.
And so 2 detonations happen on Britannia. Tons and tons of sailors are lost. And the ship is toast. Provence takes 1 shell and also detonates, it does not detonate. but almost does. It takes a shell to the magazine, but they manage to flood it before it gets dangerous. But she beaches as well. So you have Dunkirk and Provence on the beach. But Strasbourg escapes. These hits are all kind of confused. We're not entirely sure which British battleship hit which ship. I like to favor that Hood was credited with Dunkirk, but we're not entirely sure that it was Hood hitting Dunkirk. Because the official British report says shells from Hood, Valiant, and Resolution sink Dunkirk. They don't say Hood sinks Dunkirk. They said Hood, Valiant, and Resolution sink Dunkirk.
It was a shooting gallery anyway. So at this point, I'm not sure where the pride could be found. It was just I see a comment from Crowley saying that as a historian, I can only suggest to read some recent literature on the subject, which I'm pretty sure Blip did. By no means, Mozarkibe can be blamed on Gensul, the blame, but it's on Targos that stands today. We're not blaming anybody at this point. We're just reviewing an incident that unfortunately happened due to miscommunication. That was the first thing Blip said before even starting on Mozarkibe. So we're pronouncing names of people involved here. And personal opinions as well, the matter. But on the general purpose, we all agree that it was just a massive miscommunication, which led to
of course, there are variations on how they determine Gensul's matter in this, to where it's all his fault or it's not his fault at all. In the end of the day, it is a communication failure all around, it doesn't matter how you slice it. Bad communication is happening between all parties involved. The British have bad communications, bad translations. The French Admiralty is getting bad communications, and Gensul seems to be having bad communications with the French Admiralty. Doesn't matter how you slice it, there's bad communication going on. Whether or not it's Gensul's fault, that is a different determination.
I see a question from Mobius saying, do you think UK made the right choice on Mozarkibe, or do you think they could have handled it differently?
Considering the information that the UK had at the time, that was the only choice that they had.
I would agree with this statement, even as a French person. I mean, the thing is, Mozarkibe is probably one of the darkest time in relatively recent history between France and the UK. It was like the last very massive incident, military incident between the two countries as allies. So it's still a matter like my family. I've learned about Mozarkibe before playing World War Warships. So it was like in our history books and so on and so forth. And as a French person, after going over the subject a lot of time, I see the side of the British. Like they were highly concerned of these very powerful ships falling into the wrong hands, and they did not have the man or the resources to man them themselves. So what was the decision left? Even on a time as pressing as World War II, when you had to take decisions that were critical very often and in very short spans. So yes.
And
I don't think the British could have handled it any other way without putting themselves at risk.
Yep.
So yeah.
Even though, as I said, Germany did not have any intention on taking the French fleet, but Britain had no way of knowing that. Mm-hmm. So, and they had no way of trusting any intel they had regarding that, if they did. So, it's an understandable British decision. And
so, what was the final, let's say, casualty and the impact on the rest of the world?
So, it was in the thousands for the French.
Say again?
It was in the thousands for the French.
No. Yeah, I mean, human casualty, fair enough, but like a TLDR of...
So a couple destroyers are sunk, a auxiliary ship or two are sunk. Dunkirk is out of action. The Bretagne is completely sunk. Provence is out of action and basically is done for. But Strasbourg makes it out and goes to Toulon. And so I want to go through the multiple detonations result of them parking the ships nose in? No, they weren't. And the ships were able to fire at the British ships and did. Dunkirk and Strasbourg both fired guns at the British ships, but I don't think they didn't really achieve any hits with them. So the hits to Dunkirk, you had 4 hits. The first hit hits the roof of turret 2. And so you have the turrets are looking over the right side of the ship, the starboard side of the ship, towards the British fleet. And a shell comes on, and it comes in, and it hits at a 20-degree angle and bounces off the top of the turret and jamming that side of the turret. Well, actually killing everybody on that side of that turret. And basically it bounces off, goes 2 kilometers behind the ship, up a hill, and basically that's that. What happens on the inside of that turret is basically a spall of armor breaks off on the inside of the turret and bounces around. It ends up landing in a cartridge that's being loaded and detonates the cartridge in a gun tube. And it kills everybody in that side of the turret, but the bulkhead, because these turrets are split into 2 halves,
As we said in
holds.
prior.
And so the other side of the turret is still in action. And so it proves that the design works, at least in this case. And so then the flash doors were sealed and properly done, and they work perfect. And so only the farthest to the right gun 8, is completely disabled.
Okay.
The middle gun is still working. They just need.
But there's just no crew.
There's no crew in it, and then another shell hits aft, and it's a classic over-penetration. It cuts through the top of the ship, goes through basically an unarmored portion of the ship, but it cuts the steering cables on its way through.
Oh.
So there's cables running through the ship everywhere, and it cuts through the steering cables and goes through and detonates underwater.
Hence why Dunkirk is not maneuverable anymore.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and then the 2 main hits, one of them goes midships through hits the midships through the top of the belt, and so and it just goes straight through the 240 or 225 millimeter angled belt, and goes into the middle of the ship and detonates above the boiler rooms, in a medical space, and this hit also goes through the starboard 130 millimeter turret, and so it takes part of the barbette with it, and also detonates cartridges in the 130 millimeter turret, but it's not as big, so it's not as major, but it's not good by any stretch, and also causes a loss of power in the entirety of the ship, and basically chokes out one of the boiler rooms, and killing everybody in the boiler room of Dunkirk. The second hit went lower in the ship, and so it strikes again through the armored belt, and it basically goes through the armored belt. It goes through the turtleback in the armored belt, and so these ships do have a turtleback to them, and so it goes through the outer armor belt, goes through the turtleback, and then it goes through, and on the inside of the turtleback, which is the V shape there, that's a fuel cell. So it goes through part of the fuel cell and ends up in the boiler room. Comes out and smashes into a condenser and into one of the boilers, and basically ruins that engine space, but it doesn't detonate. And causes a bunch of damage that's fixable, but it's not good. And it kills all the crew in boiler room 2, because that impact on the condenser lets out a bunch of high pressure steam, which is not good for human bodies. And the damage seemed worse than it is in reality, because it was all fixable. And so Dunkirk. And later on, I think it's Admiral Jinsel again, communicates that Dunkirk will be operational again, basically, and communicates to the British. The British intercepts, or to the Admiralty, British intercepts this, and they say, we can't have that. And so they send Ark Royal, who is in part of their group,
To finish her off, essentially.
to finish off the job. So a bunch of torpedo bombers, or swordfish torpedo bombers, come in and attack Dunkirk again. Dunkirk, by this point, has an auxiliary ship lined up next to her that's full of depth charges. And so the torpedoes that hit Dunkirk either are duds or they miss. And one torpedo hits this auxiliary ship and goes off, setting off 14 depth charges right next to Dunkirk.
It must have been quite the firework between Bretagne going off twice and then this.
Yeah, and that's 1,400 kilograms of explosives
Next to a ship.
next to Dunkirk, and it blows a hole in the side of the ship pretty much.
Yes. Okay.
And so Dunkirk is very much out of action, but she's not dead. And that's basically that's how Dunkirk is damaged at Dakar. They eventually build a cofferdam and actually get it, which is like a casing on the outside of the hull, and get it to Toulon, which is in the southern France. They're working on repairing her, kind of, but the Germany then decides to invade again with that part of France, and so the French fleet scuttles.
Scuttles it to just put it down.
Can
I
you
guess.
send the pole out?
Yes, was there any pictures of this damage anywhere?
The only picture I have is this one, which this I believe shows her before the detonation, but I'm not entirely sure.
All right. So, people, I will put a straw poll into the chat right now. This essentially will allow you to vote on the next Ships of the Line stream. So the choices that Mr. Princeblip have for you are American cruisers, German destroyers, or Japanese aircraft carriers. We don't have a date for the next stream yet, but these are the three main lines that Princeblip wants to review for the next stream. So vote away, and we'll have the result at the end of the stream, where there will also be a special announcement. So we don't have a final time. I mean, I'm not sure how much material you still have to cover, probably for another half hour.
Not a ton, but yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the stream, we'll have a special announcement as well. So stick around, it will be good. Vote away, you have the link.
Yeah, if you want to play a battle in battle in.
Let's get Jean Bart out. Maybe you have some stuff to say about her.
Yeah, we can do Jean Bart real quick. I want to go on what happens to Strasbourg on her way, or while she's escaping.
All right, so let's do another one with Dunkirk then. In that case.
Yeah. So Strasbourg is making her way out of Mers El Kabir and is running away. At first, people don't. Cunningham doesn't believe that Strasbourg escaped because things are very confusing at the time. And so, but eventually it comes out that Strasbourg has escaped, and so Hood is dispatched as well as Ark Royal is dispatched to chase down Strasbourg. Strasbourg's making as much steam and as much speed as it can, but for some reason the smoke that it's emitting is like black. It turns out that the part of the quay or part of the dock basically that it was attached to had been broken off and made its way into an intake, an air intake, and
it was burning in the smokestack.
Well, no. It was causing the boilers to run inappropriately.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right, interesting.
And so it was so basically it was a bunch of black smoke, and it was not great. And so Hood was chasing Strasbourg, but Hood strips a turbine, and basically says, "I'm too old for this," and breaks down. And
what does stripping a turbine mean?
So a turbine has a bunch of like blades on the inside.
Yes.
And so basically, to describe what happens is basically like it shreds itself apart.
Okay.
So it's not a good experience.
Complete breakdown of an engine.
Yeah.
All right. Of a turbine, sorry.
And so so Strasbourg gets away. She gets attacked by more swordfish from Ark Royal, but doesn't get hit or anything. But does take a little bit of damage from the whole event. This masonry bit that's gassing it's basically gassing the engine rooms. Because there's no way to actually there's no forcing air getting rid of exhaust, and so the crew inside the boiler room that's being affected by this are all choked, and they don't all die. 5 crewmen die, 30 there are 30 casualties, and 5 of them die from asphyxiation. But Strasbourg makes it away. And this is one of the, like, I guess, major weaknesses of the Dunkirk design is that the smokestack system is pretty exposed. It's above the armor, and if you land a hit in there, you're going to slow down the ship massively or cause the engine room to have a bunch of problems. So, so Strasbourg makes it away. She does have to fire some of her guns for anti-aircraft purposes. I'm not sure if she ends up hitting any French, or not French, but British aircraft, but she just makes it away. And so, yeah, and so, but she ends up having to open all of her hatches at one point and basically get all the fumes out of her engine spaces. And that's whenever they find 30 crewmen inside have passed out, and 5 of them have died in that time.
Yikes. Is she fully crewed when she's get on that
Pretty much, yeah.
sail? Yeah, okay.
So, yeah. And so, but she makes it out of there and gets to Toulon, and that basically happened.
So what happens to her on the long run after that?
So in
She
the
gets
long
to
run,
Toulon.
she gets to Toulon. She does a few sailing, or a few, I guess technically peacetime sailing, and in the Mediterranean, basically just kind of doing training cruises and that sort of thing. They're allowed to do that. That's where the tricolor painting on the turret is. That's the historical painting of Dunkirk. I think Dunkirk actually had it as well, and Strasbourg had it. And basically, there was like, that was how they indicated that they were neutral. And so and so Strasbourg did a couple of training cruises, but eventually she is scuttled when Germany invades again, and and then she gets scrapped by Italy for money, basically, and she actually does get shelled while she's being scrapped by the USS Nevada, and she also an American bomber is also attacked too. So the major visual difference between Dunkirk and Strasbourg is that Strasbourg has an extra bridge deck, and so and that's the main difference between the two. You'll have you can look at the front of the two ships, and Dunkirk has one like trapezoidal bridge, and then Strasbourg has another one on top.
I'm just trying to kill this kid off.
Very thin ship.
Yep, prone to overpen. He's slightly angled, so hopefully this will arm, but I doubt it. I just want to get rid of him, please. Just like that, perfect. Because I have a Tennessee on my left side, and it's gonna be very rough to deal with. But don't let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
What's the caliber of Iron Duke? 305, correct?
343.
43. Can Dunkirk bounce that? It's 25mm.
Yes.
Let's hope that she can.
It's less than 14 inch, so.
Yes. All right. In quite the pickle here, Robin. It's gonna be okay as long as we. I mean, they still have 3 of the
That was a fun
LEDs.
what if question. What role do I think the British would have put the French fleet in if they had joined them? So personally, I believe that they would have sent them to the Far East. That's what they end up doing with Richelieu, because the Dunkirks are one of the best options that the Allies have for countering the Congo class. So that's essentially like what my thought would be. Having a couple of Dunkirks running around the Far East would be pretty interesting, and lots of opportunities to fight some of the Congos.
I think what I regret the most, seeing the amount of museum ship that the US or even the UK can have, is that most like French ships were relatively unlucky during the war in the fact that they either got scuttled, destroyed, or had a fate that was not specifically, let's say, good. in the end,
Yeah.
which is a big shame in my opinion. Now, how are we doing on? It's gonna be rough to win that one.
Yeah. And so, and then also, like, if Richelieu joined the hunt for Bismarck along with Hood and Wales, that would have been a very interesting engagement. I don't think Richelieu. She might have been ready for that battle by then. Personally, my money would probably be on the Richelieu against Bismarck. Her guns are better. They're not necessarily more accurate guns, but they're more powerful guns for sure. And the armor of Richelieu, oh yeah, that's something I haven't mentioned yet. The armor of Richelieu is probably the best armor layout of any of the treaty battleships. These are the 35,000 ton battleships. It's thicker than Bismarck's armor, basically thicker than anything except for the outer edges of the King George V armor. It's angled at a very significant degree. It's a 15.25 degree angle. And it is 13.5 inches thick, and it's a good quality armor. So the Richelieus have an extensive belt armor. It isn't quite as tall as it should be, but I guess that's a trade-off. It does have an element of turtleback, which is both a blessing and a curse. And the deck armor is the thickest of all battleship deck armor, except for the Yamato, if I remember right. And so, nothing to complain there. It is an internal armor scheme, which is not the best, but it helps save weight. What battleships would be superior and inferior to the Richelieu class if they went head-to-head with them? So an Iowa would be superior to a Richelieu, no questions asked. Vanguard is probably, yeah, Vanguard's superior to a Richelieu. Maybe not John Bart when she's fully in service, but Vanguard, like Vanguard versus John Bart, that's a very close matchup. Littorio, my money's probably on a Richelieu versus a Littorio. Bismarck has the weight to take some damage against a Richelieu, but that's a very even fight. And a Yamato is going to beat a Richelieu most of the time.
Well, can we do a 1v6, people, you reckon?
Just carry.
I don't think so.
And then, yeah, we're aware about the side platings on some of the French battleships not really working.
We need some money shots, basically.
So,
if we don't get money shots, it's going to be a lost game. Yeah, this is not a winnable game kind of shot at this point. It really isn't. It is not a money shot.
The Americans did have pretty good armor for the Iowas and South Dakota class, and pretty extensive armor. But the thing is with the American armor is that it's not very thick. It's only a 12-inch, 12.2 inch. Oh yeah, we didn't talk about Dakar. We'll get there. So the American armor isn't very thick, but it is well angled, and so and that would give it some advantages and some disadvantages. The Richelieu versus the South Dakota is a very, very, very close matchup. So
Get out of here, Nando, with your 6 overpans.
and so, but on to why Richelieu was missing a gun turret in the New York photo, which is not this photo, but and not that photo, but this photo. So when Richelieu is deployed to Dakar, which is off the west coast of, they're asking to see your Dunkirk build, by the way.
Oh, I think the picture got disabled too.
And so, yeah, I disabled it. So during the French, or Richelieu gets sent to Dakar and is there during the Mers el Kabir attack situation. Britain also does the same thing to Dakar. There's less ships there, and the French there also say no, and so they fight. And so it's the HMS Barham versus Richelieu, which is not a fair fight for Barham. But Richelieu isn't complete at that point. And Richelieu has some problem with her shells. So the 15-inch French shell has a base cap on it that allows them to put gas canisters into it for gas attacks. A lot of ships had some capability of doing gas attacks, but this is kind of a unique case because it causes a problem. This gas cap basically ends up smashing under the pressure of firing and blows up the shell inside the barrel. And so this happens 3 times to Richelieu during the attack on Dakar, one of the attacks on Dakar, because there were several. And she blows up she shatters one of her barrels. Another barrel ends up stripping out 8 meters of rifling out of the barrel.
Oh yeah, because there's the rifling is a different part of the barrel, and then the barrel wraps around the rifling itself. Correct.
I can't remember if that's how they did it with the French guns or not. That's
like
how
the
they did
barrel
it with some.
is essentially a sleeve for the rifling. Okay.
I don't know if that's how they did it with these guns. That is how you can do it. But essentially, they were stripped out. But the
barrel.
And then another one has another detonation breaks. So they have to replace 3 barrels on Richelieu. One of them is very visually broken, but they actually have to replace 3 of the barrels, and they take barrels from Jean Bart to fix Richelieu.
And there she is.
And so that's what happens with Richelieu. And so Jean Bart is a very interesting story. So by the time that Germany is basically finishing off France in the ground war, Jean Bart is by no means complete. And they rush her completion and get her out of Saint-Nazaire dockyard. And they escape. She gets bombed during the escapes, but it's not too bad. But she has several breakdowns en route because the boiler rooms and the engines are not completed. And so they have to actually stop for half a day in the middle of U-boat territory.
Oh boy!
And to basically swap around condensers from one boiler room to another to get them working. And they eventually get to Casablanca, Morocco. The deck armor is 6.7 inches.
Which translates to?
170 millimeters.
Okay.
I think.
Here we go. You have your answer.
So, Casablanca, it gets to Casablanca, and basically it only has 1 turret at this point. So it has 1 turret, 4 guns. The other turret, there's the barbette and the frame for the turret, but no armor.
And the guns are just not there.
And then and no guns.
Because they haven't been produced yet, or they're just somewhere else in France.
They're somewhere else in France, if I remember right. But because basically they had to make the ship as light as possible in order to get it out of Saint-Nazaire.
As fast as possible, yeah.
And they actually concrete over the top of the barbette so that nothing can get into it, including rain, including shells. And so Jean Bart is in various stages of uncompleteness at Casablanca, and they make a makeshift fire control system by stealing a torpedo fire control system off of a destroyer, the Ensign Gabolda. And they also they combine that with some surface fire control and basically make a jerry-rigged triangulation system so that they can get some semblance of accuracy. And I also use some old Dunkirk gear to finish her.
I see you, Juice. No need to spam me. Thank you very much. That's good. You got in the same game as me. Well done, buddy. I'm glad to make your evening, mate.
But the announcement's at the end of the stream. We'll get there. And so Jean Bart is at Casablanca, Morocco, when Operation Torch begins, and this is the Allied invasion of North Africa. And so Jean Bart is a battleship that's in the area and has to be dealt with. So naturally, the United States wants to show off a little bit, and so they send the USS Massachusetts, which is a brand spanking new battleship, to fight Jean Bart, which is kind of an unfair fight because Jean Bart is not finished in any way. So she takes she fights with Massachusetts, fires off a couple salvos, but doesn't get any hits off. The Massachusetts hits back. And so so John Bart is hit by by 16-inch shells, probably 7, but it's 6 at least. And basically the first one penetrates, goes basically over the ship and penetrates the aft deck right into the 152 millimeter gun magazines and detonates in the magazines. Luckily, John Bart didn't have any of them installed at the time, so there was no ammunition back there.
Okay, so it's essentially one of the least damaging hit any battleship could hope to receive at this point.
It was the luckiest, unluckiest hit in
Yikes.
possibility. And
It's
so,
like you would hit a citadel but get no damage. Still,
Yeah.
you have the ribbon.
and so, and John Bart is stationary. She's locked up in a dockyard doing this and taking this. And so it's actually relatively minor damage, although it would be devastating in a ship, or it would have basically blown off the rear end of the ship had the 152 millimeters existed and been loaded. So lucky in that one. The second hit passes through the funnel and then goes through some of the outer decks, but doesn't do serious damage. Lucky again. The third hit bounces off the side of the quay, the side of the dock, and bounces off and then goes into the ship, bounces off the armor again, and then goes out through the bottom and is a dud and is never found. And then the fourth one comes in and it hits the 90 millimeter saluting gun on the side of the first turret, and it basically nails the gun and then jams the turret, but they're able to fix it by the end of the day. And then the fifth turret comes in, bounces off the deck, hits the second barbette, bounces off, and this is inside the ship above the armor deck. So it comes in, bounces off the armor deck, bounces off the inside of the second barbette, and goes all the way down the ship and basically stops inside the ship, right behind one of the, right in front of one of the 152 millimeter barbettes. And then the last shell went through the rear of the rear deck and into the engine spaces and detonates in the engines, or not the engine, the steering spaces. And that's Massachusetts' damage to John Bart. Not actually a lot of damage, all things considered. It could have been a lot worse. And the United States Navy thinks that they took out the ship and disabled it, which was not the case whenever they came back later and got shot at again. And so they take the, they end up taking notice of this again, because I mean the USS Augusta was getting straddled by the John Bart, so that wasn't going to stand. And so the USS Ranger is called in to attack her and hits her. She hit her on the first day with 2 500-pound bombs, and then on the second day hits her again with 2 1,000-pound bombs, and these do a large majority of the damage to John Bart. Let me pull up the picture here. You can see in this picture the rear end of the ship is completely messed up. It's a combination of 16-inch shells and 1,000-pound bombs.
Jesus.
And then the front end of the ship at the bow, you can see a ripple in the bow. It's because it got blown out by another bomb. And so the majority of the actual damage is done by USS Ranger and not from the Massachusetts. And yeah, so you can see that the second turret is basically very much incomplete, and everything is not complete at all. There's no secondary guns. There's just some AA guns here and there. Yeah, it was a construction. And so, and that was John Bart. She ends up getting captured and taken by U.S. forces, more or less. And her guns are used to fix Richelieu in New York. And and she is basically, she's cannibalized to keep Richelieu running throughout the rest of the war. And she ends up getting commissioned in 1951 and completed, but she has to basically be entirely rebuilt. And so Richelieu gets refitted, and then there were some proposals to finish Jean Bart, but none of them went through. There was probably one as well to do her as a
You
carrier,
gotta be-
but I think that was a French proposal and not a U.S. one. And and then there was also a huge anti-aircraft proposal as well, where they basically just covered it with 15-inch or 5-inch 38 guns. Richelieu, after her refit, goes and serves in the Atlantic in 1943. She was in Scapa Flow, which is in the north of England, during the sinking of Scharnhorst. So it's kind of, they missed out on the sinking of Scharnhorst. They definitely could have been there. They had radar. They could have helped in the battle. It's very disappointing because Richelieu would have curb stomped Scharnhorst. But Britain got the honor for doing that. And then so after that, she does a couple other small operations, and then she gets sent to the Far East in India and goes to Trincomalee, India, where she's operating with Renown, Valiant, Queen Elizabeth, Illustrious, and Saratoga. Yeah, north of Scotland, sorry. And in the Far East, Richelieu shows very good performance in actual combat operations. She has a very high fuel efficiency. She also has a good serviceability for refueling other ships. So she can do it the American style rather than the British style, which is very fast. And then she also proves that her fire control is very effective with good ranging in bombardment operations. And basically she's able to achieve hits on target in bombardment on the second salvo. And the rate of fire that she was able to demonstrate in bombardment was almost double that of the British battleships. She was able to get a salvo off every 50 seconds, which is pretty good. So, and then also the 152 millimeter secondaries get a lot of use and do very well, surprisingly. But an unfortunate thing is that she was armed with some American shells, which did not work so well in bombardment. Basically, the fuses were a little bit too strong, and they wouldn't go off unless they hit a hard target. So they tried to use the French shells that they had remaining for bombardment. She almost took the place of HMS Valiant. During the dry dock incident. So Valiant gets put into a floating dry dock, and then the floating dry dock capsizes with Valiant inside of it, which does serious damage. RIP. That was going to be Richelieu, but they didn't trust it, so they didn't do it. Why did ships have a slower rate of fire in combat? Ranging. So they would wait for the range data to be calculated before firing the next salvo. And so oftentimes it would take much longer than the actual rate of fire of the guns. Richelieu also chased the Miyoko class cruiser Haguro, but she ended up being sunk by some destroyers. But she chased her down surprisingly well. And then she also, tragically, Richelieu hit a mine at one point. Didn't do much damage to the ship itself. However, to the crew's dismay, it shattered all the wine bottles.
God, no, I knew it. I knew it was going to be something about sailors having their wine taken away from them.
And so 3,000 liters of wine.
3,000 liters of wine.
3,000 liters of wine in the wine stowage gets shattered and spilled.
My soul.
It sets off the flooding alarm.
Okay. What's next, Fletcher? That's yikes. Okay.
Try to pronounce one time Richelieu. It's Richelieu.
So we'll do the battleship
Yeah,
names, one after the other in the port after that game.
Yeah.
I promise to you. I'm not sure how long you want to keep the streak going. If you have any
So that's
anecdotes.
basically all I have. laid out for the stream. Richelieu ends up finishing the war, and she and John Bart serve only one time together, and they sail around into the Cold War. John Bart is finished in it's either 1949 or 1951, and serves into the 60s, if I remember right. You can see her in a couple movies actually, and they serve on quite long. Although John Bart's only real action as a full finished ship was in the Suez Canal crisis. She fired at least one salvo there, but that was it really.
So with all that said, if you had to sum up the history of French battleships in a couple of sentences, considering every information you just gave it to us,
Yeah.
what would it be?
In World War I, they were behind the times. In World War II, they were ahead of the times, I would say. But in all of the time, they didn't have enough time.
I like it. I always, last stream I asked the same question to Princeblip, and he, in like second, that was the most wimpiest, here we go, in seconds, he managed to get a sentence out, so.
Yeah, and so
That's, I mean, I learned a big deal out of stuff, especially regarding the lower tier ships. It's very interesting to see the impacts of every essentially every other nations, and it's actually kind of crazy to see. Yeah, I was about to say I knew that guy was AFK. It's actually crazy to see that nations impacted each other so much on ship design, will be inspiring themselves from it, or outright just answering with other designs because they see that Italy is building the Litorios. Holy, just on paper, gave me a plan for a battleship that would confront that.
yeah,
And I feel like most of the French design history were just to keep up with the competition. At the same time, they managed to get something that was actually sometimes above it in some cases.
yeah,
Which, I mean, every big nations that had a proper navy have done at some point, Italians included, I'm gonna guess, but you know, I'm French, so I'm gonna pay more attention to this.
everybody has their design blunders,
Uh-huh.
and so for the French, it's the pre-dreadnoughts and the Dantons. For the British, it's probably the battle cruisers, unfortunately, and then for the Americans, this might be how slow the standards are. You know, everybody has a problem, so has a design failure, basically.
But I mean, thank you so much, Blip, for just talking through this. It's almost 3 hours. We will have a stream for 3 hours, I'm sure, with with what's left on the menu for you guys.
Yep.
But I mean, talking like this for 3 hours and keeping the information flowing, I'm just impressed. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Now it's time for your lesson. All of you, listen very closely, because I'm not going to do this a lot of time. All right. Courbet. Cour, like cour. Bay. Courbet. That's this one. Courbet. The next one is going to be a bit more tricky. It's Bretagne. 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 It's not Bretagne, it's Bretagne. You don't say nye at the end, you say Bretagne. All right? So, Courbet, Bretagne. This one, you should be able to say it. I actually prefer the way it sounds in English, to be fully fair, but that's Dunkerque. It's not Dunkirk, like you guys say with a dun, like dun dun. No, it's Dunkerque. That's Dunkerque. All right? You say the E at the end. You don't say Dunkirk. You say Dunkirk. Next one over is going to be Normandie. Normandie, which is also a region. Normandy. Here we go. Not Normandy. Oh, whatever. This one, same as the English. Lyon or Lion, as some would say for the English version, but this is Lyon. It's not champagne, okay? Not champagne. It's champagne. Champagne. The A, champagne, not A, champagne. Okay? This one is not Gascon. It's, I would agree this one is a bit tricky. Gascogne. Gas, like gas essentially. Cogne. Gascogne. Gascogne. Easy enough. Jean Bart, you don't say the T in French. In English you say Jean Bart maybe, but in French you don't say the T. So Jean Bart. And this one, which Blip struggles the most with, not the start of the word but the end, is Richelieu. You would say the E in the middle, so it's going to be Richelieu. It's not lieu, like it's lieu. Richelieu. All right? So Richelieu, Jean Bart, Gascogne, Champagne, Lyon, Normandie, Dunkerque, Bretagne et Courbet. Voilà, voilà, voilà. Merci à vous.
But I guess the obligatory question is it really Champagne if it doesn't come from the Champagne region?
Well, no, it's not. If you talk about the alcohol, it's not champagne if it doesn't come from the Champagne region. It's like every other kind of wine. They are trademarked to their origin, the vineyards. So you can't, like, some wine will be depicted from the region or a specific castle. Some wine will be depicted by the type of grape. But Champagne is only made in Bourgogne, Champagne. Yeah, that's it. Anything else is either going to be crémant or just bubbly wine, but it's not champagne. That's it. That's precise here.
So, yeah.
And JFO, I will ban you if you ever mention chocolatine once again in any fashion. And that's final, okay? I'm not messing around here. It's not chocolatine, it's croissant au chocolat. Point. All right, enough French for tonight.
So, anyhow, moving on, we do have a special announcement for you guys.
We do.
And we will be back to clarify some things afterwards.
Okay. There has to be a little bit of a wind up here, of a hype up.
I'll let you.
The French stream is over. The French stuff, Blip covered everything. It's going to be on a different topic entirely. We have something for you regarding the next update, which we weren't planning on teasing tonight, but with the blessings of Mr. Filigula, which isn't here to confirm his words tonight, but it is true, he gave us the green light of teasing what's coming. And we'll talk about it right after you guys see what is about. And we'll be able to give more detail and discuss a few questions. Not everything, but please sit back, enjoy the show. I mean,
welcome back.
Are you not entertained? Is this not why you're here? Okay, lots of reactions.
Yeah, so next update, we will have the Paolo Emilio and the ZF6. And so you guys have asked us all year for Tier 7
God.
premium destroyers.
And we knew all along. We just couldn't tell.
And so, you've also asked us for a global XP ship. And so Paolo Emilio is our new Tier 7 global XP ship. And so we hope that we will bring it to you all. But we have a very important thing to note with the Paolo Emilio, because I know some of you will go back and watch the video again, and I haven't seen too much mentioned here. In the trailer teaser we just showed, it shows a regular smoke generator symbol. That is subject to change.
Yes.
So that might be changed for an ESG, but at this time,
They just might be changed regarding the smokes. So let's just make a good differentiation here, guys. ZF6 is the next campaign ship. Paolo Emilio doesn't have anything to do with the campaign. It will be released as available for all global XPDD. We don't have the amount of global XP yet, but it is coming next update along with ZF6. So ZF6 is a campaign ship. Paolo Emilio is a global XP ship. And I already see questions regarding Italian destroyer commanders. We can't tell yet. And there's just no plans for them yet. But yes, regarding the smoke of Paolo Emilio, it will probably be released with a normal smoke, but that smoke might be subject to change in the future. We have stuff ready for this.
So yeah, we've got some. We knew that you guys expect the yellow smoke, and we want the yellow smoke. So we're already pushing for that. So.
I have to say, as both your dedicated community managers, it is a lot of weight off our chests to be able to tell that yes, there will be not only one premium tier 7 DD, but two. ZF6 and Paolo Emilio. I'll show you the teaser again at the end of the stream. We also have the results for the poll for you guys.
Indeed.
Least chosen, which is also surprising for me, was actually German destroyers with only 30% of the votes. Yes.
Dang.
Japanese carriers were second with only 34% of the votes, which was a very close match, as you can make the quick math now, which means that the American cruisers are going to be the next one with a 37% vote.
Lost
total.
vowel noises.
So American cruisers, we have 2 lines to review. Oh boy, that's going to be interesting.
That's going to be another. That's going to be another long haul.
Blip is like, yes, finally, I'm finally done with my research. The stream's over, and then you guys just lay it thick again with yet another one. But this stream may take a bit more time to prepare.
I'm going to go for like 1920 on. I'm not going to worry about anything before that. To be fair, there's not much before that, but
6 hour streams then maybe a 6 hour stream.
So.
But I'm not sure if I will be covering that stream this time. I may leave Canna to do that task with Lane. Or we could have maybe someone from PC over to come and play. That would be interesting to have.
That
maybe.
Would be interesting.
I mean, I'm saying this. Sorry, I'm saying this is literally an idea that pops through my head. There's nothing planned for it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yep. So I think that's everything we have. So thank you for coming, everybody.
Yeah.
Get hyped. And because also next week we're probably going to have patch notes, so get hyped for that.
There's much more coming your way, guys, and that's all we can say for now. I'll leave Lane to say his goodbyes.
Thanks for coming. The French battleships are near and dear to my heart because I love their designs, at least their modern designs. And so thanks for coming and thanks for listening. I hope I covered everything that I meant to cover, but there is a lot. And so thanks for coming, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.
Okay, well, as Blip said, thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate these streams because I learn a lot, and there's a lot of time as well for gameplay. We don't have that much to review content-wise. It's more like historical stuff, so we can really pay attention to. For me, it's really like paying attention to the details on the ships because they're mind-blowing, and trying to interact with you guys a bit more, even if we have a hard time answering the questions. There's just the two of us. But yeah. Turret bugs, we covered it. Rewind the stream if you want to check it out. We are trying to iron it out, and we'll have more info afterwards. So, get hyped, as Blip said. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you next time. We will see you next time, and keep an eye on our social medias for upcoming streams as well. If you want to interact with us, we are on Discord, we are on Reddit, we are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So make sure to go onto our social medias, interact with the stream, shout a vote to your friends if you want. You know, always helps. And the views were good tonight, so thank you for hanging out. That's me. Have a fantastic weekend, and here, you can have the teaser once again. So, have a great one, guys. Take it easy.
1 second. Sorry,
Oh.
I didn't mention the books that I used. So the best source on anything French battleships is John Jordan's French Battleships from 1922 to 1956.
Okay, can you say that slowly so I can type it
Yeah,
in the
so
chat?
it's John Jordan's French Battleships from 1942 or 1922 to 1956. It's John Jordan and something Dumas. Jordan and Dumas.
1922 to
56.
56.
And so like that's the best like entry battleship for French battleships. And then there's also another book called The French Navy in World War II by Modal and Alphon, a couple of French admirals. That's a good book. And then there's another book that is it's Jane's. Basically Jane's Allied battleships from World War II.
Like Blip spends an unhealthy amount of time like scrolling through all these documentations, and he would be sitting next to me and be like, Robin, you have to check this out. Did you know that the Richelieu got a turret, a bouncer shell? And it's so amazing because I'm sitting next to him and he's just throwing these kind of bits that he's saving for you guys during the stream. But hey, we've overtake our time here, and it's been a long day. So we'll leave you guys to it. Have the teaser once again, and this is the real goodbye now. See ya.